Hello, 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 hello. Welcome once again to Not a Prog Reborn, but the return of Magic the Gathering set reviews. I believe last time when I talked about this, which was quite a while ago, I said I probably wasn't going to do a set review for the TMNT set, and I didn't. But we're back to Universes Within, however you want to describe it, sets, and yeah, back to doing something that I really enjoy doing, which is talking about Magic the Gathering cards. My name is M. Kosler. I'm a longtime Magic the Gathering player. I've been playing for probably 25 years now. Started around the Onslaught block. Playing off and on over the years. Have been back in it since around Bloomborough, the end of Bloomborough, beginning of Duskmorn. I've taken a little bit of a break since the Avatar set, really. Really midway into the Lorwyn set, Lorwyn Eclipse. Got sick, and then wasn't really enjoying the Lorwyn Limited environment. I'd moved to doing more limited stuff, and we're on like year 12 of basically the same rotation in standard, so I just decided to give a little bit of a pause. We'll see how things go as the sets come out. Maybe I'll get back into it with the upcoming Hobbit set. Maybe I'll just wait till the next rotation. But I still enjoy talking about and thinking about Magic the Gathering cards. I'm a primarily a Magic the Gathering arena player, many-time Mythic player on both limited and standard best of one constructed. For the physical game, I primarily do Commander, but when we're making these discussions, when we're going with this full set review, my focus is going to be on competitive formats. I know there's CEDH, but I'm talking about standard, best of one, and the limited environment. As far as the setting, we're back in Strixhaven, one of my favorite sets from back in the day, primarily due to the Mystical Archive stuff. I was a huge fan of that. It's kind of lost a little bit of its luster with how things have sort of changed in the Magic the Gathering space since then. We get, so many bonus sheets, so many extra cards thrown into packs these days. The uniqueness of Mystical Archives is a little awkward, but I believe there will be a Mystical Archive card. At least there will be one Mystical Archive card per pack. So they are going to be important from a limited environment, which means we will likely talk about these cards when we get to the very end of these set review days. But yeah, not much more to say here. Let's go ahead and get this party started. This thing would show up for me, but Here we are. There we go. Now we're showing up. The Dawning Archaic is our very first card. We're going to be going in set number order. So we're going to be starting with our colorless non-artifact cards, which there are a number, including this one, the Dawning Archaic. For 10 generic mana, we have a legendary creature avatar at Mythic. It is a 7/7 reach that costs 1 generic less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So if you have 5 sorceries, instants and sorceries in your graveyard, this is 5 mana, 7/7 reach. If you have 10, this is free. And then whenever the Dawning Archaic attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. They've had mechanics similar to this for over the years. The ability to recast, kind of a free Snapcaster Mage effect, except this is on attack. This is not on ETB, which is probably the death knell for a card like this. So there are plenty of decks in the existing format, in the current format, your Lessons decks, your Spelemental decks, that do a great job of filling your graveyard with instants and sorceries, right? Your Spelemental decks are playing things like Edimurt Crab. Some of them are playing things like Tolarian Terror. There's like Hearth Elemental, I think is what it's called, that all have this same text where it's reduce 1 generic for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. So there are already decks that are trying to maximize that on that to begin with. The big problem with something like Dawning Archaic is that it's legendary. So unlike a Tolarian Terror, Idimert Crab style deck, you're not able to get multiple of these and just immediately present this super powerful board. It doesn't have like ward like you have on Tolarian Terror, so it is just, you know, susceptible to Doomblade, and you don't get any real value in. Given that this doesn't have any real value unless it actually attacks, and primarily the decks that would be able to get this card cheap enough to allow you to cast this ahead of schedule, consistently ahead of schedule or way ahead of schedule, your graveyard's likely going to be filled with a lot of like cantrippy style low impact spells. So even if you do get something free, you know, that's always nice, but it's not going to be huge for you. You know, maybe if you're putting this into a Lessons deck and you can recast your Accumulate Wisdoms or things like that, recast a stock up, that's certainly good. But if you're having to recast, you know, cantrips or boomerang basics or firebending lessons, things like that, it's going to be a little bit awkward. So to me, I think this is much more of a commander card than a constructed card, but it's a cool card to see anyways. Rancorous Archaic is up next. For 5 generic, we have a creature avatar at common. It is a 2/2 with trample and reach, so way overcosted for its stats, but it has Converge, which is, I believe it's a returning mechanic. I don't remember exactly which set it came from, but it's very similar to mechanics like Domain or Chroma, stuff like that, where it cares about the number of different colors of mana used to cast this spell. So this creature's converge is it enters with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. So it's 5 generic mana if you happen to cast it for Wooburg, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black, 1 red, 1 green. Then this would be a 7/7 trample reach for 5, which is a pretty, you know, it's still just a beat stick, but it's a pretty good beat stick at that point. Basically would be a competing against the mythic that we just saw, and this one has trample, so it doesn't get chump blocked like the Wandering Archaic. Pretty obviously this is sort of a limited card for a limited converge deck. I'm jumping way ahead, but we do have a full set of common dual lands, common mana fixing lands. So you do have the ability to live the dream with something like Rancorous Archaic, where you can get up to 5. I would say you really wouldn't want to play this card unless you can fairly consistently get at least 3 colors, so that you have a 5 mana 5/5 trample reach with this. Once you're doing 5 mana for a 4/4 trample reach, you're getting a little undercosted there. So, not much else to say here. Rancorous Archaic. And it's specifically, one important thing to note, it's specifically for each color of mana spent to cast it. So even if you have, Leyline of the Guild Pact is in standard right now, and so unlike Domain, which cares about the colors, the number of different colored permanents you have on the battlefield, this is specifically about the mana. So a Leyline of the Guild Pact would allow you to, tap one of each color mana for any color that you want, but it's not like that you can put a Leyline of the Guild Pact on the battlefield and, I don't know, say if this reduced mana cost instead of, gate +1/+1 counters for mana, it wouldn't become free or anything like that, like we saw with, like one of the things that you see in, like, modern Domain Zoo. So, anyways, Rancorous Archaic. One thing I should note, whenever I do these reviews, set reviews, we typically spend a little bit of time talking about a new mechanic, whether it is a returning mechanic or new to the set, the first time that we see it. But any subsequent time that we see that mechanic, we're not going to rehash the whole spiel on what it is. We're just going to assume that everybody's been paying attention, watching along, and are all on the same page. Sundering Archaic is up next. For 6 generic, we have a creature avatar uncommon. It's a 3/3, also with Converge. When this creature enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast this creature. And it also has, for 2 generic, put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. 6 mana for 3/3 that sort of ETB O-rings something. A little on the expensive side, right? There is Earth Kingdom Protector, or Earth Kingdom Rider. I can figure what the name of the card was, but it was the 3 mana white card that sort of did very similar things. It hit things with mana value 3 or less. This one you could, again, if you can meet the Wooburg requirement, get all the way up to mana value 5 or less. And this hits any non-land permanent instead of specific types that you got with that creature from the Avatar set. The problem is, this isn't like X. The cost of this card is X. The cost of this card is always 6, and you're sort of changing what level of thing that you can grab with it based off of meeting its Converge requirement. So Here, again, I think 3 is probably where you need to be for this card to even be playable at all. But even then, 6 mana is so expensive for just a 3/3 with really no other text on it. You know, you have this graveyard hate text technically on it, but from a limited perspective, which is really the only place that this card would exist, from a limited perspective, the graveyard hate is going to be very, very niche. So I'm not a huge fan of this, even in limited. This would be one of those cards where if I see it in my uncommon slot, I'd be a little disappointed. But anyways, Sundering Archaic. Together as One is up next. For 6 generic, we have a sorcery at rare. It also has Converge. It seems like all of these, well, most of these colorless non-artifacts have Converge. Target player draws X cards. Together as One deals X damage to any target, and you gain X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. This one I think is close to standard playable. It's really competing against something like Jeskai Revelation in your sort of like 5-color control decks that people have been playing around with. The ones with the Astral Cornucopia. I think it's called Astral Cornucopia. The 3-mana artifact that you gain some life based off of the number of colors in the casting cost. Because if you can get to Wooburg with this, draw 5, deal 5, gain 5, pretty good. Important thing to note that it's target player and X to any target. So if really the only reason that they do that is, or the main reason that they do that is so that if you were to have gone, if it just said, you know, together as One deals X damage to any target, you draw X cards and you gain X life. If you decided to try and point the damage at a creature your opponent controls rather than at their face, and your opponent flickered their creature or sacrificed their creature for value or something like that, then the whole spell would fizzle because the only valid target that you had was no longer valid. With multiple targets like this, you target yourself for the draw, and then you target the creature that you want to shoot, and even if they bounce or flicker their own creature, the effects will, the card draw and the life gain would still happen. Here, I think, like all these, I think 3 is kind of the magic number where you would want to be. Certainly if you're doing constructed, you're trying to hit 5. But if you think about 3, that's basically the same thing as a Sphinx's Rev, right? Sphinx's Revelation is X white, white, blue, or it's white, blue, blue. I forget what the order is, but it's 3 color or 3 colored pips and then X to draw X and gain X. So it would end up being 6 total for 6 total mana for a Sphinx's Rev. This is always going to be 6 mana. So this would be equal to a Sphinx's Rev for 3. Can be better than Sphinx's Rev on, you know, mana value if you're able to go higher than 3 different colors of mana spent to cast it, because it's always going to be 6. The biggest thing here is that it's sorcery speed, compared to Sphinx's Rev being an instant speed spell where you could just hold up your counter magic, and then if your opponent didn't do anything scary enough, you got to Sphinx's Revelation for X to refill your hand, regain some life, etc., etc. I think this has an outside shot in constructed. In limited, pretty darn good. We're going to be a real reason for wanting to be in the Converge deck, if that is a viable strategy. So keep this card in mind. Keep the idea of playing Converge in mind, because I think that they're trying to make this a subtype for the limited environment. Transcendent Archaic. We got another Archaic here. For 7 generic, we have a creature avatar at uncommon. It is a 6/6 with the Vigilance. It also has Converge. When this creature enters, you may draw X cards, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. If you would draw 1 or more cards this way, discard 2 cards. I think this card's decent. From a limited perspective. I don't think this is going to see any play in Constructed. You can certainly, there are certainly ways that in Constructed to get up to 7 mana. But it is just sort of a 7 mana 6/6 Vigilance. And some versions of your sort of ramp decks are like your Ugin style ramp decks. They're not really going to be able to take advantage of the Converge stuff, because a lot of the ramp that you get from those decks is colorless ramp, so it's going to be hard to be able to find the actual colors of mana to trigger the Converge. Here I think that you're fine. 3 again, obviously a good spot, but I think you're okay with 2, especially if you have some sort of graveyard synergy. If you just have 2 different colors of mana, it's basically a Faithless Looting, draw 2, discard 2. You would like to be able to draw 3 is where, like I say, you generally like to hit, because you at least get to keep, it brings you up on card advantage, I should say, because you could draw 3, discard 2. I think this, of the Archaics that we've seen, certainly better than the other uncommon Archaic that we've already seen. Just sort of a fine beat stick in your Converge deck. Done with our colorless cards, we're on to our white cards, and we have first up Ajani's Response. A little bit of lore here. Ajani does show up on Strixhaven. For 4 and a white, we have an instant common. It says destroy target creature, and this spell costs 3 generic less to cast if it targets a tapped creature. So it's instant speed, so if your opponent attacks and the creature doesn't have vigilance, 2 mana destroy target creature. You know, kind of what we expect in this type of spell has been reprinted many times for a limited environment. You know, in a pinch, 5 mana destroy something with no real restriction, certainly fine, but you can hold up 2 mana to protect yourself from a swing back if you go if you leave yourself open with something like a Johnny's Response. You know, they banned up the beanstalk, so you don't have to worry about anything like that out there. But yeah, limited removal. Not much else to say here. Antiquities on the Loose is up next. For 1 white, we have a sorcery at rare. Create 2 2/2 red and white spirit creature tokens. Then if this spell was cast from anywhere other than your hand, put a +1/+1 counter on each spirit you control. It also has flashback for 4 white. And if you don't remember, flashback is you can cast it from your graveyard for its flashback cost, and then it gets exiled. So you won't be able to keep casting it over and over. You get sort of one shot at casting it again for its flashback cost. 3 mana for 4/4 in power and toughness across 2 bodies is okay. Important thing to note, if you cast this with flashback, then you are triggering the second half of this card, where the 2/2 red and white spirit creature tokens would become 3/3s, plus any other spirits you have laying around. It's not just these cards, it's any other spirits that you have get +1/+1 on them. A +1/+1 counter on them. Also, if you impulse draw, you have a Quarry Mountain Monastery, you're playing Opera Love Song, something like that. You draw these you quote unquote draw the cards off of those things. This card would not be in your hand, so just for 3 mana, you would get 2 3/3 red and white spirit creature tokens, plus all your other spirits getting a +1/+1 counter on them. So I can certainly see this in some kind of Boros tokens, Boros mid-range style deck. Maybe you're playing Count on Luck. Maybe you're playing Opera Love Song. You're playing other sort of impulse draw effects to get out there. Not like a huge staple, I think, in Standard, but it could be a role player. In Limited, it's a lot of power and toughness on the battlefield for relatively cheap. And there is a spirit theming going on throughout the set. I think, well, I don't know if all of them do. Many of the schools within Strixhaven, so this is a Lorehold card. Maybe House Lorehold, I don't remember how they actually designate them. Create spirits. So, keep an eye out for other spirits. If you end up drafting this card, keep an eye out for things that create token spirits. Even in Standard, keep an eye out for spirits out there. Ascendant Dust Speaker, not Dusk, Dust Speaker. For 4 and a white, we have a creature Orc Cleric at common. It is a flying 3/4, so 3/4 for 5, a 3/4 flyer for 5. That's kind of what you often see in Limited. When this creature enters, put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. So you can't you can't make this a 4/5 flyer for 4, which would be pretty good for Limited, especially at common, but you can give something else a +1/+1 counter. In the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. We haven't really seen this yet in Standard, or not in Standard, in the set review, but that's kind of the theme of the Lorehold deck, which is your Boros, your red and white archetype of things leaving your graveyard cause some trigger to happen. So this is a common way, a common card that you can use to trigger your other Lorehold cards to get that extra value. So keep that in mind if you end up picking up cards that care about cards getting leaving your graveyard. This is a good enabler for it. Or this is a readily available enabler for it. It might even just be good. 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer. Again, not horrible from a Limited perspective. Daydream is up next. For a single white, we have a sorcery at uncommon. It says exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it, and it has flashback for 2 and a white. This is quite an interesting card. So people have been trying, whether it be the Momo decks or even before that, people have been trying to cheat out Quantum Riddlers by flickering them when they cast them with Warp. In Standard right now, unless I'm missing something from the TMNT set, there's really only one mana flicker effect. It's Splash Portal, which also happens to be sorcery speed. So, you know, being sorcery speed does limit the effectiveness of a card like this. You're not really able to use this to save your creature from removal, things like that. This is really here for, if this is going to see standard play, this is really honed in on cheating out warp things, cheating out a Quantum Riddler, cheating out other cheap warp creatures. The fact that this has flashback for relatively cheap, you know, 3 mana is kind of, you know, you wouldn't want to just have a 3 mana version of this effect, but having a 3 mana version of this effect tacked on to a 1 mana version of this effect, you know, you're not unhappy about something like that. So I think this has a chance to be standard playable. We talked about how the Lorehold stuff, about Lorehold caring about cards leaving your graveyard. I believe they also might care about cards getting put into exile. This does both. Both by exiling a creature, flashing back causes it to leave the graveyard, and it would put it into exile after you resolve the spell or cast the spell from it using its flashback cost. So, fringe player, borderline player, could be something playable in standard, or could be something, yeah, borderline player in standard. Has uses in limited. We haven't seen any of this yet, but there is a mechanic called Prepared, and I'll bring back Daydream up when we first see our Prepare spell, which I think might be the very next card. Not yet. It's when we get to the E's. Dig Site Inventory is up next. For a single white, we have a sorcery at common that says put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains vigilance until end of turn, and it has flashback also for a single white. Not a bad card. For limited, really. Sorcery speed, you're not really going to play that type of effect in standard. I believe there's a card called Honor. I want to actually look this up. In current standard right now. I believe that's instant speed. Honor. No, that's also sorcery speed, but that also cantrips. You know, people like Honor sees some play in like your white weenie style decks. Is drawing a card better than having flashback? Probably. Being able to cantrip into something else, probably better than having flashback, because this, you're always drawing a second dig site inventory with something like Honor. Maybe you're digging for another land drop, you're digging for more threats, stuff like that. But don't be surprised if there's a aggressive white deck that plays Dig Site Inventory in standard. In limited, we already talked about the Lorehold shenanigans. There's another, I believe it's Silver Quill. We haven't seen any of the cards yet, but there's another mechanic coming up that also enjoys this, would enjoy this card in their deck for limited. So likely see this card show up more often than you would think for a relatively cheap, not very impactful combat trick. Not even really a combat trick because it's sorcery speed, but pump spell in limited. Eager Glyph Mage is up next for 3 and a white. we have a creature Cat Cleric at common. It is a 3/3. When it enters, create a 1/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. So, in the last limited environment that I spent a lot of time in, the Avatar limited environment, there was the Kyoshi Warriors, I think is what it was called. 4 mana, the same mana cost for a 3/3 that created a 1/1 token. Those were both allies, so you did have some ally synergy here. Here, you're getting a 1/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying, so the token is significantly better than the 1/1 ally token that you got from the Kyoshi Warrior. So if white is as good as white was in the Avatar set, this is a premium common. Not really going to see play in standard, not really at the power level of standard, especially given how large standard is currently, but I think a pretty high pick for white decks in limited. Elite Interceptor is up next. For a single white, we have a creature Human Wizard. It's a 1/2 at common that enters prepared. So this is our first time that we're seeing this prepared mechanic. So what exactly is prepared? So while it's prepared, you may cast a copy of its spell. Doing so unprepares it. What is its spell? Well, if you've played any Magic recently, you've sort of seen card formatting similar to this, where you have this sort of like small card on it. If you were playing during Tarkir Dragonstorm, the Omen spells. If you're playing during Wilds of Eldraine, the Adventure spells. Its spell here is the spell called Rejoinder. For 1 and a white, we have a sorcery that says you may tap or untap target creature and draw a card. So, creatures that have a signature spell is how I'm going to describe this stuff. Creatures that have a signature spell, unlike something like Adventures or Omens, you don't have access to this spell while this creature is in your hand. You know, an Omen, for one of the Omen dragons, you technically could cast the Omen side of it or the dragon side of it straight from your hand. For creatures with signature spells, I believe they're all wizards or warlocks or things like that, but we'll just call them, creatures with signature spells. They have to become prepared. Those creatures have to become prepared before you get access to their signature spell. Once they are prepared, you immediately have access to the spell. It's as if a copy of that spell magically appeared in your hand. You still have to follow the timing restrictions of the spell. So this is a sorcery, so you can only cast it when there's nothing on the stack. You can only cast it during your main phase, stuff like that. But it's as if it magically appeared in your hand. Once you cast that spell, the creature with the signature spell becomes unprepared, so you no longer have access to that spell, and can only regain access to that spell to cast it again if the creature becomes prepared again in some way. If the creature dies while and you have yet to cast the spell, the prepared spell of the signature spell of that creature, you still have to follow timing restrictions. So in this case, if you navigated to a point where you put something else on the stack, your opponent shoots this thing in response to the other spell on the stack, you're not going to be able to cast Rejoinder because it's a sorcery, and so you just lose access to Rejoinder. So, a little complicated of an effect. It's not quite as simple, quote unquote, as adventure spells or omen spells. But yeah, here's our first chance of prepared. As far as the creature goes, 1 mana for 1/2, pretty weak for as far as a body goes. You know, if you're highly aggressive, if you can do, you know, mass pump, then maybe you can get away with something. I don't think this really competes in standard. There are many other much better 1 mana creatures that you can put in like a white weenie deck, and I don't think that Rejoinder does enough. You know, you could wait till turn 3 to play this and then immediately tap or untap a creature and draw a card, but that's a pretty low power play for something like Elite Interceptor. This creature, ETB's prepared. An important thing to note, this is not a trigger to become prepared. It enters prepared. So your opponent, if this creature resolves, your opponent would not be able to, they're not given a opportunity to shoot this thing before you have access to Rejoinder. Again, like I said, if you then cast something other than Rejoinder, or move to a point where you give priority to your opponent, you know, you move from your first main to beginning of a combat or something like that, then, and pass priority to your opponent, then they would be able to get rid of this and before you cast Rejoinder. But there's no trigger that enters the stack that allows them to kill this before you get access to its signature spell, given how this one is written. This is not the only way. Entering prepared is not the only way that this will happen. We will see as we go through these cards that there are many different ways for creatures to become prepared. There are ways that creatures can become prepared multiple times. For a card like this, you know, pairing this with something like Daydream, which we just saw, is another way to re-prepare this creature. So, things to think about. This card, not a heavy hitter in limited or obviously in standard, but just things to keep in mind when thinking about creatures with signature spells. Here is our first Emeritus of Truce. For 1 white, we have a creature Cat Cleric at Mythic. It is a 3/3 that says when this creature enters, target player creates a 1/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. Then, if an opponent controls more creatures than you, this creature becomes prepared. And its signature spell is the very powerful Swords to Plowshares. For a single white, we have an instant that says exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Swords to Plowshares, an incredibly powerful card. Legacy staple, vintage staple, cube staple, commander staple. Incredibly powerful card. But again, you have to become prepared, and this is not a card that enters prepared. This one actually does have a trigger that enters the stack that, upon resolution of the trigger, might put this creature to prepared. So, unlike the last card that we just saw, which said, this creature enters prepared, this is a ETB trigger. When this creature enters, comma, do something. So, here, target player creates a 1/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. You could target yourself. You could target your opponent. Why would you ever want to target your opponent? Because if the opponent controls more creatures than you, then you can be, then the Emeritus becomes prepared. So if you have an empty board, your opponent has one big threat. Say they have a Quantum Riddler, or they have a Might Form Harmonizer. And they're wanting to, and you're wanting to get rid of it. You could go, okay, I'm going to play my I'm going to play my Emeritus of Truce. I'm going to give you the white and black Inkling creature token. And that now means that I have one creature. My opponent has two creatures. So I become prepared. If I have a mana left over, a white mana open to cast my Sword to Plowshares, I can then shoot the big thing, and they're just left with this 1/1 flyer. I could also, if my opponent is going super wide, I can just give myself the 1/1, and if they still have more creatures than me, I still get access to the Swords to Plowshares. There's obviously the bad scenario of I do this. Well, bad scenario with a grain of salt. There's the scenario where if I do this and I end up having either more or the same number of creatures as my opponent, then I don't get access to Swords to Plowshares. And because this is only an ETB trigger, when you check to see if you can become prepared, that's the only time that's the only opportunity that I have without, flickering this card or having some other way to make this creature prepared. That would be my only opportunity to get access to Sword to Plowshares. And so I think a lot of people, when they looked at this card, they were like, it's really hard, or it's not as easy, I should say, to get access to its very powerful signature spell. And so with having to jump through the hoops, maybe this card isn't that good. But it is still, if you're just playing an aggressive strategy and you're going, all right, I'm going to go 1 white, create 4 power and toughness across 2 bodies, one of those bodies being flying. That's not bad. 4 power and toughness for 3 mana is not bad in an aggressive white strategy. And in some scenarios, you would still just get access to that Sword to Plowshares because your opponent is also swarming the board. So I think that's where you really need to think of this card. Just be fine with 4 power and toughness across 2 bodies, one of those bodies being flying, and sometimes get access to Swords to Plowshares with it. And I think that ends up being a fine enough card. Obviously, if you have any ways to blink this, if you have some other way to prepare this, getting access to that Swords to Plowshares multiple times, or getting access to it when your opponent doesn't expect it, obviously very good. So something like Daydream, something like Splash Portal, stuff like that can be very powerful with a card like this. We have Charming Prince in Standard right now from the Foundation set. There's plenty of ways that you can flicker this creature to both give yourself another 1/1 flyer and potentially get access to Swords to Plowshares again. So, I think it's better than people initially think. It's not. You need to really think about how. You need to really realize that the Swords to Plowshares is just icing. So, Emeritus of Truce. Potential Standard player. Also, thank you, ISO, for joining the chat. Innis Debate Moderator. For 1 white, we have a legendary creature, Human Cleric, at uncommon. It's a 1/1 that says, when Innis enters, exile up to 1 other target creature you control. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And at the beginning of your end step, If one or more cards are put into exile this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Innis. So we just talked about Charming Prince. This is basically another copy of Charming Prince. It's a legendary copy, which is a little unfortunate, but it's a way to flicker or bounce, not bounce, a flicker or blink a creature that you control to re-trigger their effect. And then the second half, the in-step trigger, the Innis's ETB trigger would allow for that in-step trigger to turn this into a 2/2. So as long as your opponent doesn't immediately kill Innis before you get to your in-step, it's really, and as long as you had another target creature on the battlefield, this is really a 2-mana 2/2 by the time you reach your in-step. One thing to note about this, because we're in such a large standard, and we have all those warp cards from Edge of Eternities, this doesn't really work that well with warp. For warp, if you don't remember, most notably on the card Quantum Riddler, it's something where you can cast a spell for its warp cost. It enters the battlefield, and then on instep goes to exile, that you can then cast for its regular mana cost at a later time. The thing about Innis is, this is sort of a Magic rules thing. Innis has what's called an intervening if clause. So it says at the beginning of your instep, if one or more cards were put into exile this turn. So even though we know, if we can look into the future, we know that that warp card will be going to exile. And even though both the warp trigger and this trigger would enter the stack at the same time on the instep, and so in normal circumstances, you'd be able to order them in whatever order that you want so that you could have the warp trigger go before Innis goes, unless you had something else that put a card into exile this turn, because the warp card had not gone into exile by the time you reached your instep. The intervening if says, hey, we haven't seen anything yet go into exile, so we're not even going to put this trigger into the stack. So, important thing to think about if you are thinking about putting together an Azorius Blink deck, something along those lines. And apologize for the train noise there. And it's an important thing to know if you're thinking about building an Azorius Warp deck or some type of Warp deck, and thinking that Innis works very well with that. It still works okay with that. You could still go, I'm going to warp a Quantum Riddler, then play Innis. But if you try to do it the other way around, you're not going to get the +1/+1 counter from Innis. Or if you, on a later turn, you warp in another Quantum Riddler or another warp creature, you're not going to get that trigger, or that's not going to cause Innis's instep trigger to trigger. A lot of preamble talking about rules, interactions. I still think this is a fringe playable card in standard. Charming Prince, fringe play in something like an Azorius Blink deck. This has the ability to grow larger than something like a Charming Prince, so certainly playable. If you have any sort of exile removal, banishing lights, you're eating cards from your opponent's graveyard, you're eating cards from your own graveyard for value, like a Molt Tinder or something like that. It can cause Innis to, grow and grow and grow over the course of the game and become a real threat. So, yeah, I think it's certainly playable in Standard. Whether it's powerful enough to beat the existing strategies, that's a different story, but it's certainly tryable in Standard. In Limited, I also think it's pretty good. Retrigger any of your prepared creatures that ETB prepared. Get any of those effects. They, like I said, with Lorehold cards, and I think this is a Silver Quill card. They care about things leaving your graveyard. So there's tons of flashback stuff in the set. I think there'd be plenty of ways to keep triggering Ennis to make it become something that your opponent has to deal with, and you already got likely some benefit from with Ennis's ETB. Erode is up next. This is certainly one of the more talked about cards in the set. For a single white, we have an instant at rare. It says destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This is very similar to an old card called Path to Exile. Path to Exile exiled a creature, but it did not hit planeswalkers. But it was the same mana cost, and they were both instant. And they both, ramped whoever lost the creature, or whoever was the target of the spell. Things to think about with this. Path to Exile was very playable in Standard at the time. There's a card in current Standard right now called Assassin's Trophy. I've brought this up many times when I've talked about sets in the past, when I've done set reviews for recent sets. Ramping your opponent is a cost. And in a high power format like the current Standard is, ramping an opponent can be game losing. Even though this is so cheap. If your opponent, say you're playing against, a Nature's Rhythm deck, or, some generic Badger Mold Cup deck, and they go, you're playing a control list, and you decided, hey, I erode, it's 1 mana cheaper than Get Lost. I'm just, find, replace, Get Lost with Erode. 4 copies Get Lost out, 4 copies Erode in. And my opponent goes, Badger Mold Cup. And I go, ha, Erode. My opponent still gets to play their Ouroboros 1 turn early because I ramped them. Maybe your hope is that the format is it's so easy to get to 5 colors in this format that people aren't really playing basics, but that's not really true. There's plenty of monocolored decks out there. Mono green Landfall with your Might Form Harmonizers out there. Your mono red, your mono white. Even your Badger Mold Cup decks are going to have some number of basics in their deck. And so that is a cost. So, if you are a Jeskai control player or an Azorius control player, I wouldn't just go out for Get Losts in for Erodes. I would really be like, okay, maybe I do a split, or maybe I keep all of my Get Losts and just add a couple of Erodes, something like that, something along those lines. Really where a card like this shines is if you can, if you can take advantage of the huge mana disparity. If your opponent put a lot of effort into like reanimating something or, cheating something out, and then you spend your 1 mana to get it off the battlefield. Sure, you ramped them a little bit, but they had to put in so much effort to get this thing out say they're playing like a Kona deck, and they're really trying to get that Kona out there, you just being able to hold up 1 mana while you stock up on your turn to be able to fight over their Kona that they might be trying to play. Or if they're reanimating some big threat, having just 1 mana to fight over that threat is where a card like this is super powerful. But it's not just the best. It's not in a vacuum the best removal in the format, and something where you would just get rid of any of your other removal spells that you have, because there is a real cost here. Graduation Day is up next. For a single white, we have an enchantment at uncommon, and this has a new mechanic to the set called Repartee. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So it reads very similar to an old mechanic called Heroic. It also reads very similar to a mechanic that's in current standard called Valiant. Important thing to note about Repartee versus those mechanics is this is only instants and sorceries that target, but it's not creatures you control. So if you're using removal, this triggers Repartee. Given that, there's a world where I could see, given that this is only 1 mana, it's not legendary, so you can have multiple of them out. There's a world that I can see this standard play in a I had the name of the deck. It's the Orzhov God from Aether Drift. It's indestructible god that only can attack and defend if you have 7 or more cards in exile. Ketramos is its name. In your sort of Orzhov Ketramos lists, you play Graduation Day alongside Ketramos, and then you have just 1 threat that is very difficult for your opponent to deal with because it itself is indestructible, and you just sit there with all sorts of removal spells. You're exiling your opponent's stuff with these removal spells, growing your Ketramos. Ketramos has lifelink. It eventually turns on, and then you can start just pounding away with this huge creature to end the game very, very quickly. That's a world where I could see a card like Graduation Day see play. In Limited, I think it's going to be very similar. The play pattern is going to be very similar. You're going to be playing this in a Silver Quill deck that's heavy on removal, or even like a Lorehold deck that is that has a lot of, single target pump spells to take advantage of that. The main thing about this is because it's so cheap, because it just costs 1 mana, you can just sort of slot it in some turn where you're just to be mana efficient and get the party started. So this will be a fun sort of build around challenge in Limited, and I think it has an outside shot of seeing play in some Ketramos style deck. Group Project is up next. For 1 on the white, we have a sorcery at uncommon. Let's create a 2/2 red and white spirit creature token. And it has flashback, tap 3 untapped creatures you control. So just as is, it's a bear, right? It's a bear that triggers anything that triggers prowess or something like that, right? Because it's a sorcery, but you just end up with a 2/2 with no other text on it. But anytime that you see there's a way that I can cast this spell for free, technically for free, not spending any actual mana, kind of sit up a little bit in your chair with something like this. I could certainly see this card sneak into play in some sort of Boros tokens style list, where you're going to have a number of creatures on the battlefield. You can go group project, immediately flash it back for the second half of the spell, or to recast it to get 4 power and toughness for basically just 2 mana. That could be a little too small ball for standard at the moment, but it's something to keep in mind. Also something to keep in mind in limited. This triggers anything that cares about cards getting exiled, because you're flashing it back. It'll go into exile when it resolves, or after it leaves the stack. It's a card leaving your graveyard. You know, all sorts of synergies going on there. So, kind of a sleeper little pick. Never underestimate a card that can be cast for free. Harsh Annotation is up next. For 1 on a white, we have an instant at uncommon. Destroy target creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying. Very similar to a card called Stroke of Midnight that has been printed many times in recent limited environments. Stroke of Midnight destroyed any non-land permanent for 3 mana and gave them just like a 1/1 human, I think is what it was. This is 1 less mana, more restrictive on what it can target. This only hits its creatures, and gives them a better creature. Stroke of Midnight, I think people, when it was very first printed, a long time ago, in one of the times that we went back to Innistrad, I believe was the first time it was printed. It might have been the first Eldraine, Throne of Eldraine, whenever it was printed. I think people thought it was going to end up being very, very good, even though it cost 3 mana. Ended up not being that great. I think that's going to be the same thing here. I think this is going to be limited to limited, where, you know, giving your opponent a 1/1 flyer, certainly still bad to do, but, you know, if you... removal is at a premium in a limited environment, so just keep that in mind. Now, there's a world, maybe, where this sees play in standard. It is only 2 mana. It is just destroy target creature. Doesn't have any restrictions on what it is. You are giving them a 1/1 flyer, but depending on how big the thing that you're destroying is, you might be completely fine with that trade-off. Get Lost already gives them map tokens, right? Is a 1/1 flyer. How much better or worse are map tokens than 1/1 flyers? You know, that's something that you'll have to think about when deciding whether you want to put in Harsh Annotation or whether you want to put in Get Lost. Certainly Get Lost can hit Planeswalkers, it can hit enchantments. It misses either artifacts or enchantments. I can't remember which one is which. But this is, you know, an option if you're not in black and are looking for other things to choose from for removal. Honorbound Page up next. For 3 and a white, we have a creature Cat Cleric at common. It's a 3/3 with first strike. Enters prepared, and its signature spell is Form's Favor. For a single white, we have a sorcery that says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. I think another pretty good limited common. 4 mana for a 3/3 first strike is a pretty good body. Immediately enters prepared. Form's Favor is a spell that targets. It's a instant or sorcery that targets, so anything with repartee triggers that causes this to trigger, or causes those cards to trigger. Is sorcery speed, so a little annoying, but you know, it's essentially jump with +1/+0. Certainly a fine curve filler in your limited deck. Informed Inkwright is up next. For 1 and a white, we have a 2/2 with Vigilance. It's a creature human wizard at rare. It also has Repartee. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, create a 1/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. I think this certainly has a chance to see play in Standard. Either in sort of an Orzhov mid-range list, you're playing removal, couple of high along with a couple of creatures, Informed Inkwright, kind of like a weird young pyromancer. It's harder to trigger the creature token making because you can't just play like card draw or like discard spells or whatever to generate your tokens, but the tokens that you get are significantly better. Instead of just being 1/1 elementals that are stuck on the ground, these are 1/1 inklings that are flying. Flying tokens, obviously better. The body itself, not terrible. 2/2 with Vigilance. Could also just see this in a, again, White Weenie or Boros style tokens deck or aggressive deck. You're playing honors, you're playing the dig site, whatever it was called that we saw earlier in this set. This isn't legendary, so you can have multiple of them on the battlefield and really start popping off. So I think this is a player in the Standard. And obviously very good in limited. Ink Shape Demonstrator is up next. For 3 and a white, we have a creature Elephant Cleric at uncommon. It has Ward 2 and it's a 3/4. 4 mana for a 3/4 Ward 2. Pretty good. Fights the other 4 mana white cards that we've seen fairly well. Even the one with First Strike. Because it has 4 toughness, it can block that cleanly. This also has Repartee. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, this creature gets +1/+0 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Pretty good limited card. Not going to see anything outside of limited, but a pretty good limited card. Interjection is up next. For a single white, we have an instant at common. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains first strike until end of turn. Seen this style of white pump spell, 1 mana, give it +2/+2 plus something else. A lot in limited environments. This triggers your Repartee. This triggers prowess. It's instant speed, so good combat trick. Great on defense because you're giving your creature first strike. Yeah, not much else to say here. Not really going to see play in Standard, I don't think, but certainly something to keep in the back of your head in limited. Joined Researchers is up next. For 1 and a white, we have a creature Human Cleric Wizard at rare. It is a 2/2 with first strike. That says at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent has more cards in hand than you, this creature becomes prepared. And what is its signature spell? Well, it's Secret Rendezvous. If you play it back when the original Strixhaven happened, these are the women depicted in the card Secret Rendezvous that came from that first Strixhaven set. So what is Secret Rendezvous? If you don't know, 1 white sorcery. You and target opponent each draw 3 cards. Secret Rendezvous never really saw play in Standard. Really is much more of a commander card. In Standard, there's a Secret Rendezvous style effect as the second chapter in it's called The Legend of Yangshen from the Avatar set. And that card really hasn't seen play in Standard. And it was very powerful in Limited. But even in Limited, when I saw people play it, very, very rarely did they ever elect to do the Chapter 2 where you draw 3 cards, and then your opponent draws 3 cards as well. Because giving your opponent cards could draw them into the way to get rid of the Legend of Yangshen. In this case, draw them away to get rid of Drawing to Researchers or get them out of whatever jam you're putting them in. The body is fine enough. 2 mana for 2/2 first strike. First strike is a pretty good keyword. There's the Kinsbale Elite or whatever from Lauren Eclipse, which was also a 2 mana 2/2 with first strike. I think just is better than this card. Important thing to note when we're first talking about prepared cards, this is an example of a creature with a signature spell that can re-prepare itself. Every instep, whether it is your instep or their instep, this checks to see if your opponent has more cards than you and then prepares this creature. But like I said, Secret Rendezvous, not a card that I generally want to cast in 1v1. So I'm not putting this that high for standard playability. In Limited, the body's fine enough. If you are super aggressive, maybe you're fine with casting Secret Rendezvous. But even in Limited, I'm not so sure that this is that high of a pick. Owlin Historian is up next for 2 and a white. We have a creature bird cleric at common. It is a 2/3 with flying. ETBs Surveils 1. Surveil, look at the top card of your library. You can put it into your graveyard or leave it on the top. And then whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So here's an example of a card. We've been referencing cards that care about things leaving your graveyard. Here is an example of one. Important way to read this. It's whenever one or more cards leave, you get +1/+1. So if you have an effect that removes multiple cards at once, so some effect that's like that has a cost of like removing 3 cards from your graveyard, this would only get +1/+1 in that case. But if you had something where it's like remove a card and you triggered that 3 times, even though the same number of cards left your graveyard as the other one, this creature would get +3/+3 because it's 3 separate triggers. Perfectly fine, I think, in Limited. 3 mana for a 2/3. ETB Surveil 1. Not a bad body. 3 mana for a 2/3 flyer, I should say. ETB Surveil 1. Not a bad body. Not a high pick, I wouldn't think, but curve filler. Practiced Offense is up next. For 2 and a white, we have a sorcery at rare. It says, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. Target creature gains your choice of double strike or lifelink until end of turn. And it has flashback for 1 and a white. Just fun, storytelling through mechanics. The card's called Practiced Offense. The flashback cost is cheaper than the original cost because they practiced it by doing it at least once in most cases. So, just a little fun storytelling through mechanics. Also similar to the colorless card that we saw, Together as One, I think is what it was called. This has 2 targets. You target the player that gets that has their creatures get +1/+1 counters, and you target a individual creature to give it double strike or lifelink. That's really only there. I really can't ever think of a reason that you would want to give your opponent's creatures all +1/+1. But the reason that they have that there is so that if your opponent killed the creature that you were giving double strike or lifelink to while this was on the stack, if you didn't have that second target, then the entire spell would fizzle, which would be very bad, especially for a card at rare. So even if they kill the creature that you're making, a huge threat by giving it double strike or trying to gain your life back by giving it lifelink, everything else on your board is still going to get a +1/+1 counter. All that being said, 3 mana for this effect, I don't really know. There's I forget the name of the card. It's War something. It's for 1 red and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield, deal 1 damage to each opponent. I think that in general is just better than this because it's a static effect. It's going to last for it's going to last until they spend effort to remove it. Here, if you practiced offense, only the creatures that are currently on the battlefield get the effect, and if your opponent follows up with a sweeper, then it's as if this card never existed. Giving a single thing double strike or lifelink. This also does trigger repartee. Because it is a instant or sorcery that targets a creature. So there is a little bit of upside there. But I think this is not really a standard player. Maybe if you wanted to be mono white in a white weenie deck, maybe you could see playing this if you're going super wide, mono white tokens. I think this is going to be great and limited. But yeah, I don't know if this quite makes it for standard. Primary Research is up next. For 4 and a white, we have an enchantment at uncommon that says when this enchantment enters, return target non-land permanent card with a mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of your end step, if a card left your graveyard this turn, draw a card. So 4 mana for like an unearth style effect. Also hits non-land permanents. So, if you're, say you have a Simulacrum Synthesizer that got blown up, you can. Looks like we had a little bit of an internet hiccup. Don't know where exactly we left off with this, but Primary Research, I'll just start over with Primary Research. For 4 and a white, we have an enchantment at uncommon. When this enchantment enters, return target non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. At the beginning of your end step, if a card left your graveyard this turn, draw a card. So, this is sort of an unearth that can hit non-creatures. So, a Simulacrum Synthesizer that got blown up, or a Banishing Light effect that got blown up. This can bring those back. And it self-triggers its end-step trigger the first time that you play it with its ETB, because that's a card. As long as there was something to actually bring up, that would be a card that was leaving your graveyard this turn. Even if they immediately get rid of it, it's still left your graveyard this turn. So you get to draw a card. This works well with anything that any of those other creatures that we looked at that manipulate your graveyard. This works well with flashback, stuff like that. I don't think that this is really going to see play in standard, even in that scenario where, you know, you put this into like a Simulacrum Synthesizer deck. That deck is playing United Battlefront. You really don't want to have that many misses for United Battlefront. United Battlefront cares about non-creature, non-land permanents of mana value 3 or less. This also cares about that, but it itself is not 3 or less, so you can't hit it off of the United Battlefront. Maybe there's a world where you bring this in from the sideboard if your opponent has tons of artifact hate, so that you can bring your stuff back. But there's, you know, you just play something like Ishgard if you're really looking for ways to return to get your Simulacrum Synthesizers and stuff back. I mostly see this as a limited build around. Quillblade Laureate is up next. For 1 and a white, we have a creature Human Cleric at uncommon. It is a 1/1 with double strike, and it enters prepared. And its signature spell is Twofold Intent. For 1 and a white, we have a sorcery that says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains double strike until end of turn. There have been these type of fencing ace style creatures printed many times in the past. Double strike is certainly a powerful effect, but when it's just on a 1/1, you kind of have to go all in. And this isn't something like an Embercleave that technically comes out of nowhere and makes a big creature get double strike. Everyone's going to know what's happening. Even the Twofold Intent is sorcery speed, so they're going to know what other creature you have that's going to get double strike, so they can just sit there and hold up their removal as you're sitting there with this Twofold Intent that you're trying to figure out the best time to cast it. So don't really think it's gonna be a player in standard. I'm almost certain it's not a player in standard, and I don't even really think that it's all that great in limited. If you're hyper aggressive, maybe. But outside of that, I think it's going to be tough. Rapier Wit for 1 and a white. We have an instant at common. It says tap target creature. If it's your turn, put a stun counter on it and draw a card. So not really removal, but you can use this to sort of blank an attack of your opponents. Stop their best threat from coming in, or more likely you're going to cast it on your turn to put their best blocker out of commission, as well as keep it from attacking back on the crackback when you decide to go in. And it cantrips. Not really playable in standard. You'd really want to just remove the creature. But this does cantrip, so maybe there's a world. In limited, I think you need to be pretty aggressive to play this card. Use it on your turn, cycle it, get rid of the best blocker, go in. Would trigger Repartee, even though it's likely tapping a creature your opponent controls. But yeah, Rapier Wit. Rehearsed Debater is up next. For 2 and a white, we have a creature Jhen Bard at common. This is a 3/3 with Vigilance. 3 mana 3/3 with Vigilance. Not the worst stat line in the world. It also has Repartee. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Card filler for your Silver Quill Repartee deck in limited. Basically the only place that this is going to see play. Not much else to say here. Gonna move on to the next one. Another one of our big spells and big new mechanics in this set. Restoration Seminar. For 5 white, we have a sorcery lesson at Mythic. It says return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has Paradigm. So there's actually 2 things we want to talk about here. Lesson. It's a returning mechanic. First showed up in the original Strixhaven. Most recently showed up in the Avatar set. One thing, when we were going through the Avatar set, I think I brought it up many times during that set, that all of those lesson cards from Avatar would get significantly better should Learn, which was sort of the pairing mechanic with lessons from the original Strixhaven, come back. Learn was a mechanic that allowed you to either draw a card or discard a card when you cast a spell with Learn, or more powerfully, you got to take a lesson card from outside of the game, which in a competitive sense means your sideboard, or if you're in limited would mean cards that you opened but did not put into your deck. Just take a card from your sideboard that was a lesson and put it into your hand. They confirmed, I'm not going to hide it from you because they've confirmed it, that there are no Learn cards in Strixhaven. We've already seen that lessons from the Avatar set were powerful enough on their own to win a Pro Tour and be a large portion of the standard metagame right now. I believe that there are only 5 lessons. They are the Paradigm cards, which are one per color. So there's not much of a lessons theme in Strixhaven, in Secrets of Strixhaven. So even though we had a lessons theme in Avatar, and even though lessons are a big part of the set, or a big part of standard right now, Strixhaven is not really giving too much to that existing archetype, from what I remember from glancing over the set before I fired up the stream. Next part, Paradigm. Paradigm is a new spin on an old mechanic, thought to be, or often ranked as one of the worst mechanics of all time. It was a mechanic called Epic from the original Kamigawa block. What Epic did is you would cast a spell with Epic, then you would no longer be able to cast any other spells, but you would get a copy of the Epic spell that was cast for free. I believe it was in place of your draw step, if I remember correctly. So you never drew another spell. You couldn't cast anything else. So you couldn't even use your mana for other spells. There was really only one playable Epic card that was part of the Legacy Enchantress decks that allowed you to search your library for an enchantment and put it directly onto the battlefield, and then your mana would essentially just be there for activated abilities of your enchantments, and you would just sort of do Enchantress stuff, do Allurin stuff, I guess, and just try to build up your little pillow fort and eventually grind your opponent to death. Paradigm, very similar, but significantly fixed. Paradigm is you cast this normally. The first time that you cast it normally for 5 white. You get its effect. Then you exile it immediately. It never goes into your graveyard. After you first resolve a spell with this name, so the first time that you cast it, you're going to get its effect. You then can cast a copy of it from exile without paying its mana cost at the beginning of each of your first main phases. Sometimes you saw this as your pre-combat main phase listed there. So you essentially still get your draw step. You still have the ability to cast other things. So you can use your mana for just playing the game of Magic. You get to draw cards, you get to play lands, you get to do whatever else you want. But you just get a free copy of this spell at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. So significantly better. The effect of this card, there are a lot of similar cards. There's Perenation, I think is what it's called, from Tarkir Dragonstorm. Very similar effect to this, where you return any target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, they're very fringe, like tier 3 deck, where you would try to Perenation out a Absolute Virtue. Perenation gave the thing that you brought back. I think it was both hexproof and indestructible. So you kind of just locked the game at that point. Your opponent can't really deal with, and I think it also, and then Absolute Virtue gives you hexproof and indestructible, I think. Or it gave you can't lose the game, something like that. So you kind of just locked the game at that point. Your opponent really couldn't get rid of the Absolute Virtue in any reasonable way, and you just beat him to death. This does hit non-land permanents, so this technically is a way that you can bring back something like an Omniscience. 7 mana to bring back a 10 mana spell. You know, it is a little bit of mana cheating, but there's significantly better ways to do that. There's the Kona decks that already exist in Standard. So I don't really think that this is all that great for Standard, at least as it exists. I think this is mostly here for Commander. In Limited, you know, there's going to be worlds where you can get to 7 mana, you can cast this, and it's going to be powerful. And the longer the game goes on, the harder it is for your opponent to get out from underneath this value that you're getting from Restoration Seminar, but it's not completely unbeatable. So while it's a flashy spell and a flashy effect, don't really think that it's all that incredible in competitive 60 card or 40 card formats. Shattered Acolyte is up next. For 1 on the white, we have a creature, Dwarf Warlock, at common. It is a 2/2 with lifelink, and you can pay 1 generic and sacrifice this to destroy a target artifact or enchantment. We have seen this type of creature be printed in all various different forms all throughout recent sets. The most powerful one is probably Cathar Commando. You see it in Vintage Cube, because it's a 3/1 with flash for 2 that has the same. You can sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So you can put it into your aggressive white weenie deck or your aggressive white aggro deck and have an out to your opponent's big flashy artifact stuff. Basically the same thing that's going to happen here with Shattered Acolyte. Don't know if this really sees Standard play. There are plenty of other options in existing Standard that you can choose from. You're really just going to have to weigh whether the lifelink is better than whatever else that you have out there. And then in Limited, 2 mana 2/2 lifelink, perfectly reasonable. Probably more of a sideboard card that you bring in if your opponent has some big flashy enchantment that you want to get rid of. Soaring Stone Glider up next for 2 and a white. Creature Elephant Cleric at uncommon. It's a 4/3 Flying Vigilance. 3 mana 4/3 Flying Vigilance. There's got to be some downside. Well, There is. As initial cost to cast this spell, exile 2 cards from your graveyard or pay 1 and a white. Is this really a downside? So, if you don't have anything in your graveyard, 5 mana for a 4/3 Flying Vigilance, you're probably fine with that. That's a pretty decent body. 3 toughness is a little annoying. You know, there's a number of cheaper things that can profitably block this when you have 3 toughness. But it's still going to beat you down. If your opponent can't deal with a flyer, it's going to beat them down very quickly. And it's got vigilance, so it's also there. You know, if your opponent just has like those 1/1 flyers, it's not like they can attempt to race you. This just blocks those flyers. And then 2, we've already seen that there is a theme of cards leaving your graveyard, cards getting exiled. So the additional cost to cast this spell, if you have cards in your graveyard, this can just be upside to trigger those effects. To trigger your Innis, to trigger your other things that care about cards going to exile. So this is a pretty high pick in limited. Is this even standard playable? It might be. 3 mana for 4/3. For a 4/3 that can Flying Vigilance, that's going to beat down very quickly. So I could even see this being in a standard deck. You would need to make sure that your standard deck can fill your own graveyard, so you're probably going to be wanting to play Fabled Passages or ways to help the graveyard filling along, not just hoping that your opponent has interaction for you, but not outside the realm of possibility to see standard play. Soaring Stone Glider. Spirit Call Enthusiast for 2 and a white. We have a creature, Cat Cleric, at uncommon. It is a 3/3. It says whenever one or more tokens you control enter, this creature becomes prepared. So it doesn't ETB prepared, but it is one of those creatures that can become re-prepared on its own. And what's its signature spell? Scroll Boost for 1 and a white. We have a sorcery that says 1 or 2 target creatures each get +2/+2 until end of turn. It's a sorcery, so a little unfortunate there, but 2 mana for +4/+4 across 2 different bodies, not horrible. You put this in some kind of token strategy, you're very often going to be able to get that trigger, or be able to re-prepare this. As soon as you cast the prepared signature spell, it immediately becomes unprepared. So if you pair this alongside, there was the Repartee 2-drop that created there's the Repartee 2-drop that created 1/1 flyers. You have a Spirit Call Enthusiast. You somehow get another token on the battlefield, or another token gets created to prepare this the first time. You then cast Scroll Boost. You target your creatures. You immediately get a flyer and immediately re-prepare. So, another card that is... This one's a little more fringe. The body itself is not that great, but there's a world, if that in some sort of Repartee deck, that this could see play. And then I think in limited, this is a pretty good pick. In some sort of Lorehold, Spirit, Repartee deck, token deck. Stand Up For Yourself is next. For 2 and a white, we have an instant at uncommon. Destroy target creature with power 3 or greater. This is your uncommon removal for the limited environment. Not really going to see standard play. 3 mana is a little too expensive, especially for something that is restricted on what it can hit. But perfectly reasonable for the limited environment. Stirring Hope Singer is up next. For 2 and a white, we have a creature Bird Bard at rare. It is a 1/3 with flying and lifelink, and it has repartee. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. 3 mana for a 1/3 flyer. The body is not that great. The repartee is pretty good, and it says each creature, so whenever you do the repartee, it's going to pump itself. So the first time that you do it, it becomes a 2/4 flying lifelink. The next time, 3/5. It can start getting pretty powerful. It is itself a bird. There is bird synergy going around. So, not the worst card in the world. But I think just the fact that its initial body doesn't ETB do something, and it is just a 1/3, is probably going to keep it out of standard. Absolute house in limited. As long as you can trigger repartee, this is going to very quickly win you the game. So pretty high pick for limited, but not quite there for standard. Stone Docent is up next. For 1 and a white, we have a creature Spirit Chimera at common. It is a 3/1 for a single white, and exile this card from your graveyard. You gain 2 life, surveil 1, but you can only activate this as a sorcery. So, limited curve filler, your typical 3/1 for 2 in white. See this all the time. Itself is a spirit, so works with the cards that care about spirit synergy. It is also a way to exile a card from your graveyard. So cards that care about things leaving your graveyard, cards that care about seeing other cards go into exile, triggers both half of there. So kind of a glue piece to a number of limited archetypes. So not something that I would, not a hugely high pick, but once you're in one of those archetypes, something to keep in mind. Summoned Dromedary. For 3 and a white, we have a creature Spirit Camel at uncommon. It is a 4/3 with vigilance. 4 mana 4/3 vigilance. Okay, stat line. Nice power, but there's a lot of 3 power creatures at 4 as well. So can kind of get blocked very easily. But it also has, for 1 and a white, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Activate only as a sorcery. So it's kind of fulfills the role of a lot of like zombie-ish cards that have been in limited in the past, of something that you can just keep bringing back over and over again. You can only do this at sorcery speed, so not quite as good. You can't leave this. You can't just have this sitting in your graveyard, leave up your removal, wait for your opponent to do something. If they don't do anything, then bring this back. You have to be proactive about it. But if you're in some sort of slower controlling deck, this is a way to sort of grind your opponent out. As long as they can't easily block this, they're going to have to be sitting there chumping, trading their creatures, trading their removal to get rid of it, and you just get to bring it back and recast it at later points in the game. So an okay card for limited, not really a standard player. And we are done with white. Whew. We've been through the colorless cards and the white cards, and we're already at 2 hours. I think we can try to go through blue today. We'll see how I feel. Getting a little parched. Don't do this much talking in my job, so and I haven't streamed in quite a while, so the vocal cords aren't quite caught up to it. But anyways, Banishing Betrayal for 1 and a blue. We have an instant at common. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Surveil 1. This card, unauthorized exit, already exists in standard. Unauthorized exit does see some play in your Simic Kona lists, kind of as a drop-in replacement for the much better Forest Dispersal that got rotated out. It's literally the exact same text as unauthorized exit, so not really a reason that you would switch over to this. Maybe you like the art, I don't know. As far as limited goes, you know, okay effect, not anything to write home about. It doesn't permanently deal with anything, but it can, you know, if your opponent has some sort of Vanishing Light effect, you can use this to get your creature back, surprise block, do stuff like that. But not any sort of high pick, I wouldn't think. Brush Off is up next for 2 blue. We have an instant at uncommon. It says counter target spell, and this spell costs 1 and a blue less to cast if it targets an instant or sorcery spell. So 4 mana for a hard counter, and 1 and a blue for kind of a negate. Not really a negate, because negate is any non-creature. This is only for instants and sorceries. Not really a standard player. For 1 mana less, you have access to 3 steps ahead, even just straight up cancel. And while this has the flexibility of being kind of a negate, I think you would rather just play negate if you are really looking for a 2 mana answer to non-creature spells. So, not really a standard player, just something here for the limited environment. Campus Composer is up next for 3 and a blue. We have a creature, Merfolk Bard, at uncommon. It is a 3/4 with Ward 2. It enters prepared, and its signature spell is Aqueous Aria for 4 and a blue. Create a 3/3 blue and red elemental creature token with flying. I think this is a pretty good limited card. It curves right into itself. Play this on turn 4. You have its signature spell to play on turn 5. You know, the body is not like incredible for 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer, but you kind of got card advantage out of this card because you created a new card out of thin air. Not a card that you would really put into your deck, but just it coming alongside for free. You just get to play this. It also has Ward 2, so it's not as if if your opponent is spending mana to remove this because they're really worried about the 3/3 flyer that's coming next turn. They're basically going to have to take their entire turn to get rid of this thing because they're going to have to pay for the ward. At which point you're probably also still pretty happy. So I think this is a pretty good limited card, as long as the 3/3 flyer that you get from Aqueous Aria isn't just completely outclassed. Then I think this is a pretty good limited card. And if you have any sort of way to blink this to give you enough access again to Aqueous Aria to get more of these 3/3 flyers, then it's pretty gravy. But not much else to say here with Campus Composer. Chase Inspiration. For a single blue, we have an instant at common. It says target creature you control gets +0/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn. This is Dive Down. This is not quite Magic Damper or whatever the water mending card was called from the Avatar set. This is more Dive Down, right? You give something +0/+3 and hexproof. Fringe playable in your limited set, in your limited environment. If we are in a Prince environment, meaning that the most important things going on in the limited environment are your bombs, then this goes up in value. It was the Avatar set had a lot of good bombs, and so the card that was very similar to this saw a decent amount of play. It was also a lesson, so there was some synergy going on there. If it's more of a popper format, it's more about synergy, or it's more about just putting together a good curve, then this isn't as powerful, because there's no individual card that you really need to have stick around to make your deck hum. So taking up a card slot with something that doesn't provide any extra power, it just keeps your creature alive, isn't as important in a pauper format. So now, as I was to say here, not really going to see play in standard. If you're looking for this type of effect, you've got Magic Damper, you've got all sorts of versions of this effect, Shore Up, stuff like that. Yeah, Chase Inspiration. Deluge Virtuoso. For 2 and a blue, we have a creature Human Wizard at common. It is a 2/2 with when this creature enters, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. And this is our first instance of Opus, which I believe would be the Quandrix mechanic. No, this is the Prismari mechanic. Which is the Izzet colors, red and white. So what Opus is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If 5 or more mana was spent to cast that spell, this creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So Opus is kind of like Prowess. It's kind of like Magecraft, which was from the original Strixhaven set, in that if it cares about seeing specifically instants and sorceries for Opus. So unlike Prowess, which cares about any non-creature, this is specifically instants and sorceries. So it's a little bit worse, especially in, if you're thinking about Opus, putting Opus cards in like an Izzet Prowess style deck. It's not going to trigger off your casting your Storm Chaser's talents, which is pretty problematic given the prevalence of recasting Storm Chaser's talent, with Boomerang Basics being a loop that you do in those type of decks. But it's pretty analogous to it. And then if the spell that you cast is this big flourishy spell, 5 or more mana, then you get a significantly better effect for it. In this case, instead of just +1/+1, you're getting +2/+2. So this is a Frost Lynx, 3 mana for a 2/2 blue creature that ETBs, taps, and stuns that target creature. Frost Lynx in older limited formats has been, or was, a pretty high pick. It has definitely lost its luster over the years. There was the Rowdy Snowballers is what it was called, from the Avatar set. That was an ally, so it even had like ally synergy stuff going on, but it was just ultimately a Frost Lynx, and ended up not being that good of a card at all in that environment, even though Azorius was one of the top performing decks in that limited environment. Here, with having the Opus stuff attached to it, so that it's an actual one of the issues with things like Frostlinks is that you sort of get its one-time effect. It doesn't actually remove that creature from the battlefield. It just sort of, it's a very tempo-y play, and then it's almost, given the sort of power level of creatures, it's almost immediately outclassed. Here with Opus, the creature that did the Frostlinks effect can actually become a threat if you're able to chain spells together or play one big spell to turn it into a 4/4. So it's not just sort of sitting there waiting to find an opportunity to chump or double block or something like that. So I think this could be a little bit better compared to Frostlinks of recent time, but I don't know if it's going to be that much better. So take with that what you will. Divergent Equation is up next. For XX blue, we have an instant at uncommon that says, return up to X target instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then exile Divergent Equation. So to bring back one instant or sorcery, it would cost 3 total mana, 2 generic and a blue. To bring back 2, it would cost 5. 5 total, 4 generic and a blue, etc., etc. Instant speed, kind of flashbacky effect. Okay, 3 mana is pretty expensive. It exiles itself, so you can't kind of like loop this by, you know, doing 5, bringing back 1 spell plus another Divergent Equation, and then do it over and over and over again. So you'll eventually, so you can't do something like that. I think even if you could have, I don't know if this card would even be that good. That would kind of put you in like this top end state if you're like a hyper controlling deck that has a ton of mana, but kind of at that point, if you're able to lock up the game like that, you've probably locked up the game entirely. But anyways, I guess they just don't like that type of loop. They've had control loops like that in the past. There was the 4 mana counter spell that that you get to choose 4, I think it was target instant or sorcery cards, and put it on the bottom of your library. So you eventually got to a point where your entire library was just these counter spells, and your opponent couldn't, if you had the board cleared up, your opponent couldn't really resolve anything, and because you were constantly putting cards back into your library, you wouldn't run out of a library, and so they would eventually just deck if they didn't realize. Ultimately, I think a lot of it comes down to people play out games that are lost because they think that it's gonna turn around or their opponent's gonna make a mistake, and then they just put themselves in a miserable mindset as they're just like, oh god, wasting their life, thinking that they're putting their control opponent into a situation that they also don't want to be in. But if you're a type of player who's making that type of deck, you're probably ecstatic that your opponent is sitting there wasting their life and their time as you get to make game actions and shuffle your deck and do all sorts of stuff. So, anyways, don't think this is all that playable in standard or in limited. Could be wrong, but seems pretty weak. Echo Casting Symposium is up next. This is our blue paradigm spell. It's also our blue lesson. For 4 blue, we have a sorcery lesson at Mythic. Target player creates a token that's a copy of target creature. That's a copy of target creature you control, and it has paradigm. Couple of interesting things to think about this. It's target player creates a token, copy of target creature you control. You know, it's not really something that you can be doing in limited, but maybe in like Commander, you have a bunch of creatures that are like bad. You know, they make you sacrifice something as a combat trigger or deal damage to you on instep, stuff like that. And so you go, hey, you keep making a copy of this thing over and over again and eventually die to it. You know, that's a fun little thing that you can do in like a commander setting. Don't really think that that's something that you can do in standard. You know, there are the Greed's Gambit decks that have reared their head every once in a while in standard. But I don't really think that, but Greed's Gambit is not a creature, so you're not going to be able to use this to keep giving them more and more copies of Greed's Gambit. Really, what you're going to use this for, if you're going to even play this in standard, is to just gain value by having more and more copies of a creature that you control. It's double target, so if your opponent, again, so if your opponent removes the first thing that you try to make a copy of, if that would have happened, then the spell would have been countered, and it wouldn't have gone to paradigm, because that paradigm is part of resolving the spell. So the double target means, hey, even if they do remove the thing that you initially are trying to copy, you would still be able to try again next turn with something else. I think this is probably one of the worst ones, or at least of the two that we've seen. I think this is significantly worse than the white reanimation spell. 6 mana for, you know, a clone effect is really expensive, and the paradigm effect of this is so slow. So don't really know if this is going to see any sort of standard play. And in limited, I think this is probably better than the white one, because 6 mana is so much cheaper than 7, that you're going to be able to cast this a little more often. And the game is slow enough that you'll be able to grind out value with this, and similar to the white one, just be able to grind out a win at some point. But just getting this online 1 turn earlier is so much more powerful. So, Echo Casting Symposium, not really a standard player, decent limited card, but that's about it. And then, you know, in Commander or whatever, you can find your fun with it in Commander. Here is our blue Emeritus of Ideation. For 3 blue, we have a creature human wizard at Mythic. It is a 5/5 flying ward 2 that enters prepared. Whenever this creature attacks, you may exile 8 cards from your graveyard. If you do, this creature becomes prepared. So it ETBs prepared, and it can become re-prepared should this be able to attack, and should you have at least 8 cards in your graveyard. And so what is its signature spell? Well, it's a card from the Power 9, Ancestral Recall. For a single blue, you have an instant that says target player draws 3 cards. Obviously, Ancestral Recall is part of the Power 9. It is one of the most powerful spells ever printed in Magic the Gathering. If you ever played any of the Arena-powered Cube, you obviously know how powerful Ancestral Recall is. It is banned in Legacy. It is restricted in Vintage. It is, I think, yeah, it's banned in Commander, I believe. It's hard to know with these like alpha cards whether they're actually banned in Commander or just people don't play them because they cost $2,000 or whatever. But I believe it's just straight up banned in Commander. 5-mana 5/5 flying ward 2. Not a horrible body. Technically has an ETB in that it enters prepared. So you could just wait for turn 6 to go Emeritus of Ideation, immediately cast Ancestral Recall to refill my hand, which is not a horrible play at all. The fact that it has Ward 2 does mean that if your opponent is... You could just run this out on turn 5 and make your opponent use their entire turn to get rid of this. Or, because it has Ward 2, you're a little more likely able to untap the next turn and Ancestral Recall. I don't really think that there's going to be that many chances that you'll be able to re-prepare it, at least through its attack trigger. You know, obviously you can blink it to re-prepare it. You know, get some other way to get that ETB or get that enters to re-prepare it. I think this is pretty playable, especially in a controlling deck. This as your one creature flying 5/5 that refills your hand. Pretty darn good. Could certainly see play in Azorius Control. If you're going Jeskai, it's probably close to competing with Shiko. It's got a better body than Shiko, but it doesn't technically have an ETB. If you want to get access to the Ancestral Recall, you're going to have to wait until turn 6 to make sure that you get the 3 extra cards, whereas Shiko, you know, you play your stock up early in the game, and then Shiko immediately lets you recast that stock up from your graveyard. But this card does block an opponent's Shiko very well. So, something to keep in mind there. I could absolutely see this see play in a control list. In limited, this is insane. 5 mana for a 5/5 flying Ward 2 Ancestral Recall. Again, in limited, I don't think that you're ever going to be able to re-prepare it through its attack trigger, but casting Ancestral Recall once, again, if you've played Arena Power Cube, often that's just game over. Card quality is obviously significantly worse in a random standard limited format than in your powered cube, but you just get so much card advantage. You'll be able to find a way to piece together a victory, and they have to deal with the Emeritus itself from just killing you. So, huge bomb in limited. Certainly at least standard, at least something that you can try out in standard, and I think has a pretty good shot in Azorius Control. Encouraging Aviator up next for 2 and a blue. We have a creature Bird Wizard at uncommon. It's a 2/3 flyer. Whenever this creature attacks, it becomes prepared, and its signature spell is Jump. Another alpha card. Not quite. It's another 1 mana blue spell from alpha. Not quite the power 9, but Jump. Target creature gains flying until end of turn at instant speed. So this is an attack trigger to become prepared. you will be able to, before, you declare a bunch of attackers, and before your opponent can declare blockers, you can hold priority, cast jump on something else of yours that's attacking, so that they have to, if they're trying to block it, they're going to have to block with a flyer. I think this is a pretty good limited card. Pretty high pick uncommon, in my opinion. And you can, it just becomes prepared. So what you can, if you want to wait for like a big alpha strike, you can go, all right, I'm going to attack with encouraging aviator on one turn, not use the jump, as long as they don't get rid of the encouraging aviator in some way. Next turn, I go, all right, I'm going to cast my jump. I'm going to cast the jump that I have from the creature being prepared right now. It's going to become unprepared. I make something of mine, some other big idiot of mine that wasn't flying, now flying. I'm then going to attack with that, plus another thing that wasn't flying, and the encouraging aviator, get jump again, and then leap that over for some big alpha strike to potentially win the game. So yeah, I think this is a pretty good card in limited. Essence Scatter, nice reprint. Interesting art. I didn't really get a chance to look at the art here. Don't know if I'm a huge fan of it, because it's just a black background. For 1 and a blue, we have an instant at common, counter target creature spell. Generally, Essence Scatter is worse than something like Negate. Creature is much more narrow than non-creature. But if you're really looking for a 2-mana counter spell for creatures, here you go, Essence Scatter. I don't think that it was existing in Standard right now. I'm actually going to look that up real quick. Essence Scatter. Oh no, it was in Foundations. So it already is in Standard and it hasn't really seen a ton of play. So maybe people just get reminded that it exists because there were so many cards in Foundations. It's hard to remember all of them. But yeah, Essence Scatter. Exhibition Tidecaller. For a single blue, we have a creature, Jin Wizard, at rare. It is an 0/2 with Opus. It says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, target player mills 3 cards. And the Opus part is if 5 or more mana was spent to cast that spell, that player mills 10 cards instead. So very much Hedron Crab, Rift Crab, or whatever the other one was called. Style effect, a 1-mana creature that can mill 3 based off of some trigger. Those are based off of landfall. Landfall is generally easier to trigger than, Opus, prowess style effects. Though you can more often chain multiple Opus triggers than you can landfall triggers, especially in non-fetch land formats. We technically do have fetch lands in Standard, Fabled Passage, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, stuff like that. Escape Hatch, I forget the name of that card. Escape Tunnel is another one. But 3 of those are very bad. They're basic ETB tap fetch lands. Whereas you can go, you have multiple Exhibition Tidecallers and you go Boomerang Basics, the Fire Breathing Lesson, or Firebending Lesson, stuff like that. Just chain together a bunch of cheap cantripy spells or cheap 1-mana spells and very quickly mill a player. It does say target player, so if you are doing self-mill stuff, you can just point it at yourself, which is something that your Hedron Crabs and things like that were not. They were more just part of a mill plan. I think people will certainly try and build around this. People like playing mill. There has been in the past, I don't know how prevalent it is now. It's something that really only existed in Best of 1, but It was sort of the mill deck that was River Churn Monument comboed with Singularity Rupture to essentially over 2 turns mill your opponent's entire deck. That's more of a combo than like a real dedicated mill deck. I think you're probably more likely self-milling with this if you're actually trying to play this in standard versus trying to mill your opponent out. The last time that Rift Crab or whatever it was called was in standard, it was alongside the rogues that cared about how many cards were in your opponent's graveyard. It was alongside Into the Story, it was alongside Drown in the Lock, stuff like that. I don't think that there's anything in current standard that cares about how many cards are in your opponent's graveyard in quite the same way. So I certainly think that if you're playing this, you're probably self-milling in either some sort of lessons deck, or maybe you put this into your Superior Spider-Man list to just turbo mill yourself. Though I don't think that it quite lines up there, because you're not really casting that many instants and sorceries. In limited, this is especially if you can get 2 of them. It's rare, so it's rare that you're going to get there. But in limited, you only have 40 cards. So this can very quickly kill your opponent if you build heavily around it. It's an 0-2, so it kind of dies to a stiff breeze. But don't underestimate this in limited. Flow State is up next. For 1 and a blue, we have a sorcery at uncommon. It says look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. If there is an instant card and a sorcery card in your graveyard, instead put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I think this is generally just outclassed by Accumulate Wisdom from the Lessons deck. That is instant speed. This is sorcery speed. That, if you meet its requirement, gets you 3 cards. This will only ever get you at most 2. I think the requirement is a little easier here than something like Accumulate Wisdom in a sort of a generic deck. But in the Lessons deck, basically everything that you have is already a lesson, so it's going to be pretty easy to do the Accumulate Wisdom stuff. So I think this just gets outclassed in standard, and then in limited it's fine. I think you would really want to be able to get the draw 2 out of this, the best 2 of the top 3 out of this for it to be that playable. I think this day and age, Anticipate style of card draw is a little on the weak end. For a limited environment, but yeah, not much else to say. On to the next one. Fractal Anomaly up next. For a single blue, we have an instant at uncommon. It says create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token and put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn. Interesting that this is an instant, because it cares specifically about the number of cards you've drawn this turn. So unless you are playing instant speed card draw, you're very rarely going to cast this on your opponent's turn. You can certainly cast it at some random point outside of your main phases on your own turn. But that's... I I feel like that's just kind of a weird, awkward spot. You know, if you wait till your first main phase and you don't do any other card draw, this is 1 mana for a 1/1. It's not really that good with no other text on it, which is not really that good. Other important thing to note, we just talked about Accumulate Wisdom. We just talked about, or we've talked about Stock Up in the past. Those are probably 2 of the most important quote-unquote card draw spells in the format, and neither of them actually draw cards. Stock Up is put 2 of the top 5 cards from your library into your hand. Accumulate Wisdom is put 1 of the top 3, or if you meet the requirement, put all 3 of them into your hand, but it's all put into your hand. It's not draw. In a Lessons deck, you're going to be having things like Artist Talent triggers and Monument to Endurance triggers that do actually draw cards. So maybe you can throw this inside of some sort of Lessons deck, but then this itself is not a lesson, so like, what are you doing? Putting this into your deck, I don't really know. Is this really advancing your plan anymore? Sure, you might be able to get a big body out of this for cheap, but you're already killing them with your Monument to Endurance, so don't really know what's going on there with Fractal Anomaly. Don't really think that this is going to see play in Standard. And then in Limited, you'd really have to see, we really have to evaluate this card post, once we've taken a big look at the entire set, to see how much actual card draw there is in the set, to see how realistic it would be to make this a real creature. Well, let's think. If I just cast a cantrip on my turn post draw phase, draw step, I guess. 1 mana for a 2/2. A 1 mana 2/2 is fine, pretty good. Is it worth a card in the sense that this isn't always a 1 mana 2/2? It is often a 1 mana 1/1, and I have to have something else to make this a 1 mana 2/2. That's where you start thinking about, okay, is that enough? I don't know if this would be a high pick in Limited. This is something that I would kind of have to build around, or it's something that I would have to already see that my deck has either a lot of just raw card draw or a lot of cantrippy style effects, so that I go, oh, this Fractal Anomaly is very often going to be a 3/3 for me to want to pick it up. Anyways, Fractal Anomaly. Fractalize up next. For X and blue, we have an instant at uncommon. It says, until end of turn, target creature becomes a green and blue fractal creature. Sorry, green and blue fractal, as it already is a creature. So it becomes a green and blue fractal with base power and toughness, each equal to X plus 1. So it is not 1 mana kill something. It is just turn something into a fractal with X plus 1. So it's either you can pump a bunch of mana into this to grow a creature very large, or you can just pay 1 blue to turn a creature, because it doesn't say creature you control. You could target your opponent's thing, so you can just turn your opponent's thing into a 1/1, which, you know, you wait till combat, you make your blocks, and then you go fractalize. Ha! Boom, your big creature just got eaten. So you can, another one of the long line of blue swords to plowshares that isn't quite there. The cool thing about this is the fact that you can just use this as basically a big pump thing spell. Any +1/+1 counters that your creature has is still going to be on there, so you need to keep that in mind, both for shrinking your opponent's thing and for pumping your own thing up. Interesting card. Don't know if it's going to see any sort of standard play. Maybe weird sideboard tech in like a mono blue deck, if there exists one out there. Mono blue or like maybe Simic deck. Something that generally doesn't have good removal. And in limited, I think this could end up being all right. It's mostly for the fact that it is both kind of removal-esque and a pump spell. It's not really removal-esque because if your opponent has some creature out there that is gaining them value without getting into combat, then this doesn't get rid of that on its own, at least. You know, if you have something that is giving your opponent's creature -1/-1, then combo with Fractalize to actually kill it. Or something that dealt damage to it, combo with Fractalize to actually kill it. But if your opponent's threat is a combat threat, then you can kind of think of this as removal. We'll see. It's an interesting card to think about. Harmonized Trio. For single blue, we have a creature Merfolk Bard Wizard at rare. It is a 1/1 that has tap plus tap itself plus tap 2 untapped creatures you control. This creature becomes prepared. And its signature spell, another Blast from the Past, extremely powerful card, named Brainstorm. For a single blue, we have an instant that says draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on the top of your library in any order. We'll talk about Brainstorm in a second. So, Harmonized Trio. It's a Merfolk. It's a 1-mana 1/1 Merfolk. It itself taps, and it can tap other things. Both the Merfolk from Lost Caverns of Ixalan and the Merfolk from Lorwyn Eclipsed care about being tapped. They have tap triggers, or they care about they have tap triggers, or they care about the fact that they are tapped. You know, before Lorwyn Eclipsed, there was a Merfolk deck, a very fringe Merfolk deck that was using Submarine Schooner or something like that, alongside Deeproot Pilgrimage, in order to use the vehicle to tap a bunch of your Merfolk in order to generate a bunch of Merfolk to flood the board. I didn't like I said, I got sick during Lorwyn Eclipse and kind of haven't really been playing a bunch of Magic since then, so I don't really know if like a Merfolk deck emerged in the fringe player in Standard, but if there is one that came out of Lorwyn Eclipsed, then this synergizes very well with that. It itself is a Merfolk, it taps, and it can tap other Merfolk that care about being tapped. This is another creature that has a signature spell that can become prepared over and over and over again. Now on to Brainstorm. If you're sort of casual, or you're sort of a casual Magic observer, haven't really played Legacy but understand the card Brainstorm is talked about a lot. You know, Brainstorm is a card that shows up in Vintage Cube. It shows up in Legacy. It would be, if it was illegal in Modern, it would probably be banned in Modern. The reason that it is good in constructed formats is because of fetch lands. Brainstorm is not that good if you do something called brainstorm locking yourself. What a brainstorm lock is because it's draw 3, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library. When you only really dug, the first time that you brainstormed, you dug 3 deep. But you also know the next 2 cards that you're going to draw. So if your opponent then does something to put you into a scenario where you need to find something else, you have to be able to dig 3 deep again to get to a new card. And you only got to see 1 new card, even though you drew 3, because you brainstorm locked yourself. The reason that fetch lands are important with brainstorm is because the proper way to play brainstorm is you cast your brainstorm, you let it resolve, and then you force a shuffle on your deck. The easiest way to do so is to crack a fetch land, because that lets you get another land from your deck and then forces a shuffle. There are fetch lands in Standard. We talked about them before. Fabled Passage, plus all the bad ETB tap fetch lands. So you can, if you're really wanting to go deep into Brainstorm here, you do have the ability to unlock yourself from the Brainstorm lock with some generally bad fetch lands. But unless you actually have good fetch lands, Brainstorm is not that good of a card. So because of that, I don't really see this card outside of a Merfolk deck that cares that you have a free way to tap your creatures for value. I don't really see outside of one of those decks Harmonized Trio seeing play just as sort of like, I'm going to play this in Dimir midrange, or I'm going to play this in some sort of blue tempo deck or something like that. You really want to be able to take advantage of the fact that this is tapping your creatures down in some sort of likely Merfolk deck to get the value there. So, don't really think that this is going to be a player in Standard. Maybe in older formats, maybe in Modern, where you do have fetch lands. This now gives you access to Brainstorm. You got to jump through some hoops to get there, but you do have access to a card that you have never had access to before. So maybe it sees play in that format. Don't really think so, because of the significant hoops that you have to jump through, but you never know. Homesickness is up next. For 4 blue, we have an instant at uncommon that says target player draws 2 cards, tap up to 2 target creatures, put a stun counter on each of them. 6 mana for draw 2 plus tap and stun at instant speed. 6 mana is a lot, but this is a lot of value. You're playing for limited, not really a constructed playable card. You're playing limited control deck. You go, hold up my mana with a counter spell or a removal spell. They don't do anything even more fancy. You go, all right. Beginning of combat, when I get priority, homesickness, draw 2, tap 2, stun them. I get to swing in with my things. Don't have to worry about the crackback. Plus I refilled my hand. You know, I want to have many copies of this because it's a 6 mana spell. But if I have 1 copy of this, this is also a 6 mana instant or sorcery, so it's greater than 5. So this triggers the powered up forms of Opus. So I can see this being pretty playable in limited, in a controlling deck or an Opus deck. Hydro Chandler is up next. For 1 and a blue, we have a creature Merfolk Wizard at common. It is a 1/3 that has tap to add a single blue mana. Spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell. Or for 1 generic and tap, add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana to only cast an instant or sorcery spell. So we have a Filterer here, but you can't really use it on your Archaics. So it's not really something that you can use here for trying to do like your Converge deck, outside of the Together as One, the Converge sorcery. You can't use this for your Converge creatures, but you can use it for the Converge sorcery. Other than that, it's a mana dork in blue. Don't really see that a ton. They've done this style of mana dork a couple times now, where it's restricted on what it can actually do when it's outside of green. This one is only instants and sorceries. Sometimes it's only like artifacts. But yeah, just a limited card. Not really going to see constructed play. It is a Merfolk, but I don't think that that matters all too much. The body is too weak. The effect is too weak. Just a limited card. You'll know it when you'll know if your deck wants this card. Here we have the return of Jadzi, a card from the original Strixhaven set. Jadzi, Steward of Fate. For 2 and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Wizard at rare. She is a 2/4 that enters prepared, and when she enters, draw 2, discard 2. Okay, both of those are are fine. Well, the enters prepared we don't really know yet, but the draw 2, discard 2, 3 mana for draw 2, discard 2. That type of effect has been playable in the past in Standard when people were playing like Jeskai Oculus. They were playing like Steamcore Scholar and stuff like that as ways to get your Oculus into the graveyard to then helping hand it back onto the battlefield. You could potentially play this in your Superior Spider-Man style lists. Don't know if it's going to be that much better than something like a Steamcore Scholar or other options that already exist. Really depends on what the signature spell is. So what is Jadzi's signature spell? It's Oracle's Gift. For XX and a blue, we have a sorcery that says create X00 green and blue fractal creature tokens. Then put X +1/+1 counters on each fractal you control. So for 3 mana, you get a 1/1 fractal. For 5 mana, you get 2 2/2 fractals. And then plus a +1/+1 counter on any other fractals that you have. If you're in Quandrix, then there's the ability to put counters on your other fractal stuff. Also, there's the whole changeling stuff from Lore and Eclipse. I don't know how many actual playable changelings there are in Standard, but it is something to think about. For 7 mana, 3/3/3 fractals. It's fine. I don't think it's all that powerful of an effect. So I don't really think that Jadzi sees a ton of play in Standard. She doesn't re-prepare, so you can't get like multiple shots at creating more and more fractals as the game goes on, unless you have some other way to re-prepare her. And her draw 2, discard 2, that effect is already pretty wrapped up in the standard through things like Steam Core Scholar, which I think generally the fact that it's a Steam Core Scholar is a flyer, and the fact that with Steam Core Scholar you can only discard one if you're really specifically just trying to discard an Abhorrent Oculus or something like that. So yeah, don't really see Jadzi being that much of a player in Standard. In Limited, I think Jadzi's fine. 3 mana for a 2/4 body. That 2/4 body is not terrible. It doesn't attack well, but it's a fine blocker. And then you can just sort of hold out for a later turn when you can Oracle's Gift to put a lot of power and toughness onto the battlefield on your side. So sort of a late game finisher. But that's about it. Not like a huge bomb or anything like that. Landscape Painter is up next. For 1 on the blue, we have a creature Merfolk Wizard at common. It is a 2/1 that enters prepared, and its signature spell is Vibrant Idea. For 4 on the blue, we have a sorcery that says draw 2 cards. 2 mana for a 2/1. You know, it's a piker. Body's not that great. But it's an expensive divination, but it is a divination for free, or that comes along with this body. Not horrible. Maybe I could see you putting this in as a curve filler in some sort of controlling deck to help refill your hand in later turns. You just throw this out early. Maybe it gets a swing in, and then as the board gets mucked up, you just sort of wait around, wait till you have an opportunity to wait till you run out of things to do, and then Vibrant Idea to refill your hand, and go from there. 5 mana is expensive, so maybe you're putting yourself at a bad spot by basically having to tap out for this, but you know, not a high pick, a curve filler for a limited. Mana Sculpt is up next. For 1 blue, we have an instant at rare. It says counter target spell. If you control a wizard, add an amount of colorless equal to the amount of mana spent to cast that spell at the beginning of your next main phase. If you have played any EDH in recent memory, you know this is Mana Drain. Mana Drain, I think, is banned in Legacy. Actually, I'm going to look this up. Mana Drain. Yes, banned in Legacy, banned in Historic, banned in Brawl. It is only legal in Vintage, Commander, and Timeless. Extremely powerful card. One of the most powerful cards in Magic that is not in the Power 9. The real question is, how often are you going to have a wizard on your side of the battlefield? And that's something that you're really going to have to look at. The Emeritus is a wizard. So maybe you play this in Azorius Control, so that you can go Mana Sculpt, you go Mana Sculpt, you get all this extra mana, dump that into your Emeritus plus, whatever extra mana that you have left over, and like go super off on there. But I guess you would have already have to have your Emeritus out there. We really have to see what cheap wizards are out there, because if you don't have a wizard, this is just cancel, and you would much rather be playing Precepts Ahead than cancel, right? So this is a deck building exercise. Are there enough cheap wizards and playable wizards that you are fine putting in a card that would be cancel, that would just be cancel if you don't have a wizard on the battlefield. If you can make it so that your deck reaches whatever threshold that you're looking for, then this is playable. But in a generic control list, just play 3 steps ahead. And then in limited, I think this is just cancel. Well, I shouldn't say that. In limited, you're probably going to have more wizards than you would generally have in a large format constructed deck that wasn't specifically built to take advantage of this card. Because this set is all about wizards and sorcerers and mages and all sorts of stuff like that. So you're likely going to have a wizard floating around. I'm just trying to think from limited formats in the past. Having a big influx of colorless mana, is that really going to put you over the top? It might. I'm just trying to think, how high of a pick would you want to pick this in draft? I don't know if it's like Windmill Slam first pick. I think that you would need to see that you're pretty controlling and need to see that you are pretty wizard heavy. Because again, if you're just picking this and it just ends up being cancel hasn't really been that playable of a limited card for a long time. So just keep that in mind. Mathemagics up next. For XX blue, we have a sorcery at Mythic. It says target player draws 2 to the X cards. So that's 2 exponential X. If your math is a little out of practice, it gives you all the equations for where X is from 0 to 5. So for just 2 mana, this would be sorcery speed, target player draws 1 card. For 4 mana, target player draws 2 cards. For, 6 mana? 4 blue, target player draws 4 cards. 8 mana, 6 blue, target player draws 8 cards. For 10 mana, target player draws 16. For 12 mana, target player draws 32. And so for 14 mana, target player draws 64. And really, when we're not talking about Commander, 64 is the end. Because 64 is larger than a minimum deck size constructed deck. 32, and it's larger than a minimum deck size limited deck. 32 is basically larger than anyone's deck size would be at the time that you're able to cast a 12 mana spell. So where I see Mathemagics, I don't really see this as much of a standard player. I think if we go through the curve, right? 2 mana for draw 1, pretty bad. Sorcery speed draw 1, pretty bad. 4 mana draw 2, At sorcery speed, pretty bad. You know, divination is 3 mana, draw 2. And we have stock up in the standard. You know, if this was instant speed, that's closer to things that we've seen in the past. You know, the 4 mana scry 2, draw 2, stuff like that. Closer to things that we've seen in the past, but still, this day and age, pretty weak. 6 mana, draw 4. That kind of lines up. I don't remember the name exactly, but that's starting to line up with actual cards, even at sorcery speed. Actual cards that have seen play in relatively recent time. 8 mana, draw 8. You're now at the point. Once you get to X is equal to 3. Once you get to 8 total mana, you're at the point where this becomes very good, because it's at least 1 card per mana spent. Once you get above that, you're getting way more than 1 card per mana spent. The biggest issue with something like this is when you're drawing 8, when you're drawing 16, unless you have no maximum hand size, sure, you can pick the best of the bunch, but you're having to get rid of so much. And it's not like you're going to have leftover mana when you spent 10 total to draw 16. Where I think this really sees play, because I don't really think that it's going to see play. Well, if there is a standard deck that can 1 turn burst out a large amount of mana, then I can see this as a kill spell. You kind of like, it's a stroke of genius that doesn't require, you know, a stroke of genius, a brain geyser or something like that. That doesn't require near infinite to kill your opponent. Because like we said, what is that? 12 mana will basically kill anyone in limited. I doubt you're going to be able to get to 12 mana in many limited games. But that's close to killing a lot of people in standard, especially if they're drawing a lot of cards themselves, if they're doing any sort of self-mill. That's close to killing a lot of people. If you can get up to 14 mana, X is equal to 6, you're going to kill everyone. There's no minimum deck size deck in Constructed. You know, you're making them draw 64 cards. They're just going to die. So if there are decks out there that can generate 1 large burst on a single turn, this amount of mana, then Mathematics is a kill spell. So I think that this has, you know, there's a world where this sees play in like Arena Cube, Powered Cube, right? As an alternate for a Storm deck or a big mana deck, you know, a Tolarian Academy deck, as an alternate kill spell, instead of having to only using the Brain Freeze or whatever. You can use Mathematics to kill your opponent with it. It's a little more susceptible to counter magic, obviously, but it is possibly something that you could see in like a cube or something like that. I don't know if it's really going to see play in standard. I think you're probably, if you can get to that much mana, even if you get like a single turn burst of that much mana, you have things like Nature's Rhythm that is going to get you a Craterhoof Behemoth to likely in the game in 1 turn, and you don't, that is only for 10 mana instead of 14. And you have the ability to harmonize with that, so it's cheaper than that. But I could see this play in some sort of cube as a win condition for big mana decks in cube. And I basically think that's the only place that this sees play. Matter Bending Mage. For 2 and a blue, we have a creature human wizard at uncommon. It's a 2/2. When it enters, return up to one other target creature to its owner's hand. And whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, this creature can't be blocked this turn. So a 3 mana war style effect. It can target your creatures, it can target your opponent's creatures. It doesn't have flash or anything, but whatever. We saw the submarine vehicle was very good in the Avatar set. That was a 3/3 body. This is only a 2/2. But still pretty, I think it's probably going to be pretty good. And then the extra part, this is kind of a Quandrix thing where they care about spells that have X in its mana cost. There's going to be quite a few spells that have X in their mana cost. We saw Fractalize. We just saw Mathemagics. There's going to be other cards that have X in their mana cost. We saw Oracle's Gift as the signature spell of Jadzi. Quandrix cares about casting spells with X in their mana cost. 2/2 unblockable, it gets to get in, but it's not a huge threat, only being a 2/2 itself. So I think this is mostly here as sort of a meddling mage, well, not a meddling mage, like a exclusion mage, man of war style effect. Bounce your opponent's best blocker, make them replay it, bounce something of yours that you want to re-trigger their ETB, stuff like that. All sorts of fun stuff that you can do with Matter Bending Mage, with Man of War style effects. But that's about it. Muse Seeker is up next. For 1 and a blue, we have a creature Elf Wizard at uncommon. It is a 1/2 with Opus. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. Then discard a card unless 5 or more mana was spent to cast that spell. 1 mana 1/2, body's pretty weak. The looting effect that comes alongside casting instants and sorceries is pretty good. And there's a world where maybe you play this in your a Monument into Endurance style deck, but I think Artist Talent just does the job significantly better. Artist Talent triggers off of, I think, any non-creature, not just instants and sorceries, and it itself is a non-creature, so it triggers any prowess that you have floating around. Yeah. In limited, this is probably fine. The body, again, is not that great, but putting looting on top of any of your bounce effects or card draw spells, stuff like that, just lets you dig deeper, find your better stuff. Probably all right in limited. Muse's Encouragement up next. For 4 and a blue, we have an instant at common. Create a 3/3 blue and red elemental creature token with flying, and then Surveil 2. This is basically the same thing that we saw on that 4-drop. Important thing to note, I haven't really been calling this out. Important thing to note that this is a 5 mana instant or sorcery. So this would trigger your Opus stuff. Trigger the extra powerful version of your Opus effects. This is again basically the same spell that we saw on the 3/4 with Ward 2. Except you're trading the 3/4 creature that you had to play a turn earlier with Surveil 2. So 5 mana for a 3/3 Surveil 2. That it is instant speed, which is nice. You can just hold this up alongside removal or alongside a counterspell, and then play this. Trigger your Opus stuff. Create a 3/3 flyer on your end step that they weren't expecting. sculpt your opening or sculpt your next draws. I think it can be all right. Being 5 mana is a little on the expensive side, but we've seen in certain formats in the past, you know, there were the Izzet decks from the Final Fantasy set, which were probably the best decks in that format that cared about cards that were 4 mana or greater. So it's not like when you get to 5 mana, it's not like they become completely unplayable. As long as you have enough synergy going along with it, to make it worth your while. Orisa is what I'm going to say here. Orisa, Tide Choreographer for 4 and a blue. We have a legendary creature, Merfolk Bard at uncommon. She is a 2/2. When she enters, you draw 2. So 5 mana for a 2/2 draw 2. Kind of Mold Drifter-esque. It's not a flyer, but that's whatever. This spell costs 3 generic less to cast if creatures you control have total toughness 10 or greater. 10's a lot. If you can get this down to 2 mana for a 2/2 ETB draw 2, that's pretty good. Just a 2 mana draw 2 is pretty good. That comes along with a 2/2 body is great. But you got to have a lot of toughness on the battlefield already. We haven't really seen a ton of like high toughness matters stuff here, so I think this is much more of like a... They've been doing a lot of uncommon and common legendary creatures, so it seems like they're trying to give people who want to play like Pauper Commander or Prince Commander, how you want to describe it. It's probably just called Pauper Commander because there just aren't enough common legendary creatures to have enough diversity in the format. But if you're wanting to make a Pauper Commander deck, they're just providing you with more and more options. So I don't think that this is really something that's going to see much play in standard, nor do I think it's going to see much play in limited. It's fine in limited, but I don't think it's something that you can consistently get to the point where you can get this down for 2. Pensive Professor is up next. For 1 blue, we have a creature human wizard at rare. It is an 0/2, and it has increment. This is the first instance of increment that we're seeing. This is the Quandrix ability. Increment says, whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana you spent is greater than this creature's power or toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. It's very similar to an old mechanic called Evolve. Except this is looking at the mana spent when you cast a spell. This doesn't say whenever you cast an instant or sorcery or non-creature spell. This just says a spell. So you could be casting creatures. You could be casting non-creatures. And you would still be able to increment. As long as the amount of mana that you spent is greater than one of the creature with the increment's power or toughness. This has 0 power to start with, so really anything that you cast is going to at least increment it once it's on the battlefield. And as long as you keep going up the chain, you can go further. Now, it also has, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, draw a card. So it's specifically on this creature, but increment itself is putting +1/+1 counters. So if you ever trigger increment on this creature, you're going to then draw a card with it. If you have any other ways to put +1/+1 counters on this creature, we've seen from other effects, like the practiced formation or whatever it was called, it puts a +1/+1 counter on all creatures. There's honor from the old set. There's the dig site thing from this current set that just puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature. If you target this, that's a way to draw a card. There's the Graduation Day. This pairs insanely well with Graduation Day. Boomerang basics your opponent's thing with a graduation day on the battlefield and a pensive professor. You put the +1/+1 counter from the repartee trigger from graduation day onto the pensive professor and then draw a card. You know, if that was the first time that you did it, then you got the increment trigger from the Boomerang basics that drew you a card, plus you got the graduation day trigger that drew you a card. Highly synergistic card. Might be a little too cute for how high-powered standard is right now. Probably a pretty good card in limited. It is a 3-mana 0/2, but it's very quickly going to become a much more potent threat. And along the way that it's becoming a potent threat, you're also drawing cards. So I do think that it's pretty good. It'll probably be pretty good in limited. Might be too cute for standard. Probably pretty good for limited. Procrastinate is up next for X and a blue. So here's another X spell. We have a sorcery at common. Tap target creature. Put twice X stun counters on it. Not like a hugely important spell, but things to note. This does have X in its cost. If you make X 4, then you can trigger all of your Opus stuff. Now, I wouldn't take this as a hugely high pick. You know, if X is equal to 0, it's just 1 mana tap a creature at sorcery speed. You don't get any. 2 times 0 is still 0, so you're not going to get any stun counters. You're really going to want to at least spend 2 mana on this most times to put something out of commission for 3 turns. But yeah, I don't think it's a huge pick, but it is a pick, especially if you have synergy with the X spell or with Opus. Quick Study. I believe this is a reprint from, I believe, Outlaws at Thunder Junction. For 2 and a blue, we have an instant at common. This is draw 2 cards. It's just the instant speed divination. You know, if your deck needs divination, here you go. Not much else to say here. Not going to see play in standard. Stock up is just so much better. Yeah, not much to say there. Quick Study. Run Behind. Those teeth? What is going on there? For 3 and a blue, we have an instant at common. It says target creature's owner puts it on their choice of the top or bottom of their library, and this spell costs 1 generic less to cast if it targets an attacking creature. So 4 mana put on top or bottom. You know, has been playable in limited for a while. 3 mana, you know, do this to an attacking creature, put it on the top or bottom of their library. That's pretty good. That's basically removal. It'll, if they elect to put it on top, then they're not drawing any new cards on their next turn, if they don't have any extra card draw, obviously. So if you put them into a bind, it's kind of like Brainstorm locking them. They're not going to have a way to find the card on the top of their deck is not going to be the answer that they're looking for. If they put it on the bottom, it's basically removal. You're unlikely to ever see that creature again. You can theoretically do this to your own creature if you're trying to save it. Pretty bad way to do so, but it is an option. Sky Coach Conductor. This is probably don't like to really talk a ton about Commander thoughts, but this is probably one of my favorite cards for one of my commander decks, my Abdel Adrian deck. Sky Coach Conductor for 2 and a blue. We have a creature Bird Pilot at rare. It is a 2/3 flash flying vigilance. Already a decent stat line. Enters prepared, and its signature spell is All Aboard. For a single blue, we have an instant that says exile target non-pilot, so can't be itself. Exile target non-pilot creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's a 1 mana, instant speed, flicker effect. I think this card's great. You can run it out on... you can hold it up, run it out on turn 3, and then you have this just flicker that is just sitting there, blanking any removal of your opponent. They basically have to shoot the Sky Coach and Conductor before they can shoot the thing that they actually want to kill. Your Quantum Riddler or something like that. Or your Aang Swift Savior, something like that. I think this goes great in that Azorius Flash list. This alongside your Aven Interrupters and your Aang Swift Saviors is just rebuying ways to tempo your opponent out by countering or plotting their spells, airbending their spells, stuff like that. Because this just adds this card to your hand. It's not like you have to hold this up and then spend a bunch of mana at once. You could on turn with 4 mana flash this in kind of like a Restoration Angel to save something right then. But again, you could just also turn 3 bring this out, flash this out, and then just have this All Aboard sitting there. Your opponent goes to play something, you go, hey, I'm going to flash in my Aang Swift Savior to airbend that spell. They go to then shoot your Aang Swift Savior, or they go to try and counter your... Well, I guess if they try to counter your Aang Swift Savior, then it'd be a little tough. But if they then want to try and shoot your Aang Swift Savior, then you just All Aboard your Aang Swift Savior, and then airbend that removal spell. So again, they'd have to specifically touch the Sky Coach Conductor, but at that point, you would just use the All Aboard on the Aang Swift Savior to prevent the to either bounce the Sky Coach Conductor back to your, or airbend the Sky Coach Conductor back so that you can then recast it later, or just airbend that spell. So yeah, I think this is in that Azorius Flash list, I think that this is a great addition. The body itself is already decent. Flash flying, 2/3 vigilance. And just All Aboard makes things just very, very awkward for your opponent. Yeah, great card. It's a bird as well, so there is all that bird synergy going on. Great card. It's a flyer, works with Momo. Again, great card. Spellbook Seeker. For 3 and a blue, we have a creature Bird Wizard at common. It is a 3/3 that has flying and enters prepared, and its signature spell is Careful Study. For a single blue, we have a sorcery that says draw 2, discard 2. Basically Faithless Looting, but with no flashback on it. I think Careful Study is an old spell from back in the day. 4 mana for a 3/3 flyer. Not the worst thing in the world, but not incredible or anything like that. Coming alongside, not really card draw, just card filtering. If you have any sort of graveyard synergy, then sure. Or if you've got, things with Opus, Sure. You got things that care about card draw. Sure. I wouldn't say that this is a hugely high pick, though. Just kind of a curve filler. Tester of the Tangential. Tangential. That's how you say that. For 1 and a blue, we have a creature, Jin Wizard, at uncommon. It is a 1/1 with increment. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay X. When you do, move X +1/+1 counters from this creature onto another creature. So, you know, you have this on the battlefield. You grow it up through increment, and then you can move those counters onto something better, maybe a flyer of yours. Bring this back down to being a 1/1, which makes it much more easy to get those increment triggers going again to refuel its own power, to then potentially move to something else. I think it's okay. This is very much a limited thing. It might be a little too slow. It might be a little too cute, but I think it's okay. I think it probably would have been significantly better if this was just like an 0/1, so that you could guarantee even your 1-drop spells trigger increment. But it's fine. Textbook Tabulator. For 2 and a blue, we have a creature, Frog Wizard, at common. It's an 0/3, enters in Surveils 2, and it itself has increment. This is definitely a curve filler. An 0/3, sure, it can grow, but it is just an 0/3. It's going to take a while before it becomes anything of any power. And unlike the other increment creatures that we saw that have, you know, some value that you're really gaining off of the increment, this is just going to become a better and better blocker. Yeah, this is a real big curve filler. Wisdom of the Ages. For 4 blue, we have a sorcery at rare that says return all instant and sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, and exile Wisdom of the Ages. This is partially why I really didn't like the other X spell that we saw earlier, that returned instants and, you know, X instants and sorceries. You just have this card. Sure, this is 7 mana. That one you can just snipe a single thing to bring back, but it's just kind of awkward to be in the same set. I don't think this is that good of a card, regardless of what's being said here. This is the most commandery of commander cards, where somebody's like, "Ooh, look at all the cards I have in my hand. You know, I spent 1,000,000 mana, but I didn't actually do anything. I just have a bunch of cards in hand. I could have spent 1,000,000 mana and killed everyone, but now I just have a bunch of cards in hand. I might have no maximum hand size." The most commandery of commander cards. Not, if this is in your pack 1 pick 1, you're going to be very sad in limited, and not really something that I think is going to see play in standard. If it does see play in standard, it's going to be part of some infinite combo. But, you know, it's probably something else that's breaking this, rather than this being the hinge piece. And we're through all of our blue. And I think this is where we're going to call it for the day. They'll have all the black cards, all the red cards, all the green cards, all the multicolored cards, the colorless artifacts, and the lands to get through. So we've been through quite a number of cards. We've been through 71 cards total so far. There's still, I think there's like near 300. Let me look at the actual count. Secrets of Strixhaven, 276 So we're through a little under a third. So a lot of the cards at the end, when we start talking about lands, they're going to be the exact same card. So we're about a third through. So yeah, I always enjoy doing this. Thank you so much for anyone who stopped on by. We had ISO who stopped on by and chatted, and even if you just stopped on by and lurked, enjoy that regardless as well. Gonna be back at this whenever I'm back at this. Might be tomorrow, might be Sunday, might be Monday. Really depends just how I feel. I'm not doing this for any sort of money. I'm just doing this because I like to do it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you the next time that I see you.